You see it. All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Aaron Swartz Day. All right, really excited to be here today. We have a lot of awesome speakers for you. And today we have a hackathon going on. I just wanted to make sure everybody knows there is a hackathon going on. We have 4 main projects at this year's hackathon. We have the virtual reality museum that we have, the Swartz-Manning, which actually has forked into several different projects now. And if you are interested in that, we can give you more information. We're going to have a separate Zoom call for the hackathon all day. So you just have to DM us on Twitter at Aaron Swartz Day and let us know, or if you're on YouTube, actually, you could also message us on YouTube. We've got the whole team on our YouTube channel talking to you today, and let us know, and then we'll hook you up on the Zoom call for the hackathon. And we're going to hear from Noah from Bad Apple and Conor, who's going to be on next, talking about SecureDrop first. And then also the Internet Archive are going to have Mech, Carpels, Brewster Kale, and Tracy Jaqueth. And Mech's going to tell us about some Internet Archive projects you can hack on if you want. And if you have a project that you want to add to the hackathon, it's never too late to jump in and start telling people about your project. And we can pop you on the stream later today, and you can tell people about your project, because that's what this is all about. And don't worry about getting a lot done today. We have it set up so that you can continue to work on this throughout the week. The SecureDrop folks have set up a whole system for you to be able to hack on SecureDrop today, so that's really exciting. You can actually participate in carrying on Aaron's legacy by working on SecureDrop. And if you start something today, we're not into this kill yourself over the course of the day to get something done kind of thing. We want you to be able to hang out and talk to people, hang out in the hackathon, Zoom, and do things at your own pace and really get set up to do things so you can enjoy the speakers. And then we will take it from there as the week goes on. And I'll be posting updates on the different projects. I'll be talking about the different things people are doing. We'll have some post Q&A with the different speakers. If you don't get a chance to ask your question when they're live on camera, we can get a question to them later and still have them answer all of your questions. So we're really trying to build the community here. In many ways, last year's hackathon never ended. We started having meetings in the weeks that followed, and that collaboration led to our Bad Apple project, which is a project of the Aaron Swartz Day Police Surveillance Project. And Noah is going to tell you about that after Conor tells you about SecureDrop in just a second. But we're really excited about Bad Apple and what it can do to help with the terrible situation that we find ourselves in, where if we want to go to a protest, we have to think about if we want to get beat up by cops. And, that's just not the place that we want to be. And we found out that these bad apples, as the police force likes to call them, we sort of know it has more to do with the way they're trained from the beginning. But just say for the sake of argument that it was some bad apples, maybe we could store them in a database and track them if they get moved around from city to city. And the other thing was to make a database of oversight commissions, civilian oversight commissions for the most part. There are some commissions that have the police chief on, which, isn't really the same thing, same kind of oversight, right? It's like being on your own oversight commission, where you can rubber stamp what you're doing kind of thing. There's only a couple like that. For the most part, there has been a surge in civilian oversight commissions, which is actually a place where you could file complaints, maybe after a policeman mistreated you at a protest. So we made a database of those, and we have almost 180 of them in there nationwide. And Madison is going to tell you about those after Noah talks. So that's what we're doing today. You can ask us questions in the YouTube chat. You can also ask questions on the Twitter DM. We've got both those channels wide open. And you can also send us email at aaronswartzday@gmail.com that the team will be monitoring all day. So hopefully we have things, you know, a lot of good two-way communication going today. If anything isn't working, please let us know. We can fix it right away. Like I said, I'm really excited to have a wonderful team of volunteers working with me that we've been working together for about a year now. And today should hopefully go pretty smoothly. So if anything isn't working, don't just, you know, be like, oh yeah, well, it's Aaron Swartz Day, you know, they couldn't get their shit together or whatever. We're really organized today. So let us know if anything isn't working right and we will fix it. Okay. All right. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Conor Schaefer. He is the CTO of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and they are the home of SecureDrop. And I'm really excited to have him here today. And Conor, you're only slated for 5 minutes. If you need a little more, it's no problem at all. We love to hear from you. We want to make sure you can tell us all about what's going on today at the hackathon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Appreciate the introduction. Again, my name's Conor. I work at Freedom of the Press Foundation. I'm giving a longer-winded talk on SecureDrop specifically later today. So if you're really hungry for a lot of technical details, please tune in to the calendars on the website. What I'd like to prep people for now here, just briefly, is basically focused on the details of the hackathon, you know, what it means to get started. Before I dive into those details, I just wanted to add a little bit to the framing that Lisa so kindly provided here. The reason we've been gathering here every day, hopefully this is the last virtual one, and we'll be back in person in the archive at that most hospitable of venues next year. But the occasion of this day, I think a lot of us can really identify with the passion that Aaron so clearly brought to so many different projects that he touched, many of which went on to become something huge, and several of which, you know, went various directions, as many open source projects often do. So the project that I'm most closely affiliated that came out of Aaron was the project called SecureDrop. That was originally called Dead Drop back when Aaron Swartz was working on it. That's a reference to an old journalistic practice of leaving documents in a physical location so that they cannot be observed. FPF picked up that project, seeing the love that went into it and the promise that it would hold for empowering journalists, investigative journalists in particular, to communicate securely with sources. And FPF adopted the project about 8 years ago. I've been at FPF for about 7 years now, focused primarily on SecureDrop as well as other engineering projects that we have. The way the system works, I will provide a lot more detail, but in a nutshell, it is installed on-premise in news organizations and makes heavy use of both GPG for encryption and Tor for anonymity. So if you're interested in hacking on some of these projects, as Aaron was so passionate about, you can go to securedrop.org/hackathon. That's a redirect URL that will take you right to all the nitty-gritty details. We have a bunch of our team, full-time staff members at Freedom of the Press Foundation, who are also already online and clocking in and chugging away at some tickets. So if you want to pop into our Gitter channel, you can use a GitHub account to authenticate there and type in text with us. Lisa also will share some details about a Zoom call, and we'll be sitting in that if you prefer to speak to us directly. I'll certainly be there as well. So the specific nature of technical contributions we're looking for, most of our code is written in Python, so we're interested in server-side expertise for running Python applications, systems hardening. On our newer project, the Workstation, we have all that, plus some GUI app development in the Qt framework, also written in Python code. And if you have any knowledge of lower systems virtualization or kernel hardening, we'd be happy to chat with you as well. So please pop by in any of those venues, either Gitter or Zoom, and I'd love to hear more from you. Noah, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen here.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was going to introduce Noah. Just a second, Noah.
Yeah, no worries. Perfect. Go for it.
Hey, I just really wanted to make sure to give Noah a proper introduction here, because Noah has been just an incredible contributor to Bad Apple. His company, privacy.com, sorry, privacy.org. I do that all the time. Privacy.org makes it easier for people to have privacy applications such as VPN or different secure. I won't try to explain it wrong by mistake, but he came in and he really is pretty much the only reason we were able to pull Bad Apple off. and we all contributed a lot, but Noah is the backbone of the project and the reason why it was able to be and look as beautiful as it is. He did the website too. He did the database, he did the website, and we were able to do everything else. But the having a secure database and website was really the key to it all happening, and it's just really amazing. So now I will let him tell you about the project, and then I'll go ahead and let Noah introduce Madison when he's done, and then kick it back to me so I can introduce the next speaker. Thank you very much. Here's Noah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. That's awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you guys can all see that. So yeah, to begin, as Lisa said, I am the tech lead with Bad Apple. I've done a lot of the technical development work in terms of website, database, anything that requires technology. And basically today, I really wanted to walk through what Bad Apple is built on and how it works and give a really good privacy-focused overview. Because the reality is, when building Bad Apple, that was the number one thing that we really wanted to make sure we focused on: privacy. Because the type of information that we're hosting with Bad Apple, whether we're collecting tips or hosting misconduct reports, that information is really sensitive. And because of that, user privacy has to be our number one priority. So let's begin. So to start, let's talk about what Bad Apple is. As you can see, if you go right to our website, Bad Apple provides valuable tools and resources with the aim of holding law enforcement accountable and putting an end to police misconduct. That is a really broad overview. To get more specific, let's talk about how Bad Apple was founded and start from the bottom and talk about how it's built. So Bad Apple was founded almost a year ago now, which is crazy to think, back in December of 2020. And we focused on collecting and publishing data related to police misconduct. We knew that there was lots of bad things happening in the world, and we wanted to find a way to help right these things. And looking throughout history, the best way that change has been effected has always been through media. It's been through media, press, coverage, making things public. And because of that, we wanted to make sure that we could collect data that should be public, that in many cases is public, and have an easy to access centralized location to make that available to everyone. Ways we do that are through PRA request templates. So that means templates that you can, with wording that you can file to make Public Records Act requests in order to get information on past cases of police misconduct. We have an Oversight Commission database that Madison will be talking more about that essentially allows people to find the Oversight Commission closest to them. So if bad things do happen, they have resources that they can go to. We have an Bad Apple database, which is based off of our name and is the database of all of these so-called bad apples that have contributed to police misconduct over the years. Finally, we have our tip submissions. This information we expect to be useful to citizens, journalists, police departments, and more. Citizens can use our databases to find oversight commissions. Journalists can use our databases to gather statistics. Police departments, they can even use this database, so when they're hiring a new officer, they can check our database first so that they can see, does this officer have a history of misconduct? Is this one of those officers who just moved to the next town over when something happened with them and just get hired again? We want to make sure that everybody has access to this information and that it's free as in freedom and free as in free to use, so that everybody can use this to help affect better change in the future. That's why our database is open source, privacy respecting, and accessible. There's a lot that can be said for accessibility. We don't have time to go into all of it, but our website is available in both English and Spanish. Our website does use specific color schemes that are WCAG 2.0 AAA compliant, which is basically means that people who have vision impairments or among other things can still read our content easily. And there's more stuff that I'll get into later on. Moving on. Let's start from the bottom. We're going to start from the base, which is our physical infrastructure, and then we're going to quickly work up to the more abstract stuff. First, we use Greenhost. Greenhost is very privacy friendly, very well respected throughout the community, and they host a lot of open source projects. They have a lot of important security features as well that we use, such as full disk encryption, which some hosting providers don't offer. And their team is very kind and very open to a lot of things that most hosting providers aren't open to, such as hosting VPNs, hosting Tor, because we do have an onion service, meaning that there is Tor traffic coming to and from our server. Additionally, we host most of our infrastructure with them. So that's web servers, DNS servers, database servers, etc. Now that we have that solid privacy-based foundation with a reputable company, we're now going to go on to our server configurations. All of our servers are configured using FetchApply. FetchApply is an internal tool that is completely open source, and it's similar to Ansible or Puppet. It's largely based on Aviary, if you guys have ever heard of that, which essentially is a way to save a server configuration in software. So you can have a Git repository that has a whole bunch of settings within it, and all you have to do is install FetchApply on a bare bones server, point it to the Git repository, and it fully sets up and configures that server for you. Because of the way that this is designed, it allows us to have the utmost transparency. This is really important to us because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we know that we are hosting, or we know that people will be sending us sensitive information. And the number one thing we need is their trust. We need them to know that we're not doing anything fishy. When we say we're not hosting analytics, we're not hosting analytics. When we say we're properly protecting their submissions, we need them to be able to prove that. We need our servers to be auditable, and we need them to know exactly what's happening. That way, if they want to make suggestions or improvements or criticize, they're more than welcome to. And that way, we all end up getting better in the end. So again, FetchApply, you can visit that link below if you want to learn more about it. It's easy to use. There's lots of documentation. It's completely auditable. The code is meant to be short so that it's easy to read through and you can verify everything that's being done. And it's great for debugging as well. It allows us to, if anything goes wrong, we can go back and see the full history in Git of every change ever made to our servers. Also, if someone else wanted to stand up their own server to play around and see how everything works, they could simply install FetchApply and point it to our Git repository and it'll work. All right, gonna go a little bit quicker now. So our backend, open source technologies, we're open source all the way. So that's Ubuntu server. We have a Postgres database. Django is our web application framework. Nginx is our actual web server, our reverse proxy. These are all very secure, very reputable, very widely used open source programs. These are really important. They provide the whole backbone and infrastructure that makes all of our services work. I'd love to go into more in detail, so if you have questions, feel free to post them and I'll answer them at the end. All right, let's focus on privacy. All of the infrastructure, all of the code goes up to ensuring privacy. First, we use a v3 onion service. That is really important to us. As I mentioned before, we know that people might want to, for example, submit a tip or look up an oversight commission near them when something bad has happened to them. We want to make sure that they can do so in a private way. If they're submitting a tip, they might genuinely have fear of being harmed. If they're looking for an oversight commission, if they're submitting a tip anonymously, if they're looking for an oversight commission, something bad may have just happened to them. And it usually involves the police. And that's a really scary prospect to go up against. So we want to make sure that we can protect their privacy at all times. Using an onion service that ensures that their web traffic is hidden. That way when they're accessing our site, people on their end, on their network, it's difficult for them to tell that they're accessing our site. And on the other hand, it prevents us from having logs of them. So we don't get to see their IP addresses connecting to our site and they can maintain their privacy. We do not use JavaScript. This helps with accessibility, makes it easier for screen readers to view our site. This helps with privacy because when people are using privacy technologies, a lot of times like Tor browser on full security settings, JavaScript is disabled by default. And finally, it allows more people to access our site, for example, on older devices that may have compatibility issues with JavaScript. All of our content is self-hosted. This means all of our fonts, pretty much everything, all of our images, everything you see on the page, all of our content is hosted on our own servers. When you visit our site, your computer will not be making any requests to any other IP addresses that are not owned by us. This helps to keep you private and make sure that your data does not leak out anywhere else. Our logs are self-wiping. There is no log containing any form of personally identifiable information that stays on our servers for more than 24 hours. They're wiped at a random interval in less than 24 hours, with the average log lasting 12 hours. What this means is that we have just enough time to detect denial of service attacks and block offending IP addresses, but not enough time to actually be able to respond to a request for data and pull that data off of our servers and provide it. Again, if you want to make sure that you do not show up in any logs even from the beginning, we recommend you use our onion service. But for those of you who can't, our logs do automatically wipe. And when they're wiped, they're not erased. They're wiped, meaning that they're written over 7 times with randomized data so that they are fully unrecoverable. Finally, all of our tips are well protected. On our servers, we use asymmetric cryptography with GPG, but it's encrypted in memory on our servers before being written to a separate database table. What this means is that this tip cannot be recovered. Even if our servers are hacked, there is no way for a user to recover the information in these tips because the decryption keys are not located on our servers. We have a whole system in place where we have trusted people who are well known and that we trust, and they are able to access our tips from an air-gapped environment using decryption keys. They can then respond to them as needed. Oh, went one too far. Perfect. So just to wrap things up now, here is how you can help. The number one thing you can do is spread awareness. That means to post on social media about Bad Apple, start GitHub repositories, basically spread the word however you can. That is the number one thing that is going to help us help more people. If you can, we would love for you to contribute. Submit tips, volunteer to enter data into our databases, contribute code on GitHub, file PRA requests. You can even send us art for us to use as backgrounds on our page. Whatever you can do to help, we will happily accept it. Finally, please utilize our services. They're completely free. They're open to everybody. You can take advantage of our API, recommend your site at community events. If you know that there's a local Oversight Commission that we don't have in our database, please tell us about it. We would love to add them. Basically, do anything you can to help utilize and promote our services. If you ever have any questions at all, do not hesitate to send them to info@badapple.tools. You can visit our site at the first link on the left. You can visit our GitHub at the second link. And on the right, we have our Onion address. Awesome. So now at this point, I will see if there are any questions. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and look for some questions.
Okay, great. Conor has a question for you, Noah.
Oh, perfect. Let's hear it.
Hey, Noah. Can't get rid of me. Very cool.
No worries.
Love it.
Hey, Conor, turn your camera on, will you?
Happily. Hey there, Noah. So it was super cool. Thanks for the detailed overview. Love your use of Onion services and things like that. Love your on-the-fly encryption as well. Familiar technologies. My question, are you familiar with the Open Oversight run by Lucy Parsons Labs? If not, I highly recommend you reach out for collaboration. They've been running an open source police misconduct database since 2016. If you haven't already spoken to them, I highly recommend you reach out to them. I think you guys would have a lot to talk about.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. We will definitely reach out. That sounds very familiar. I feel like we've
right.
Reached out. So, I see Lisa talking there. Go for it, Lisa.
Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify, we talked to Freddie, and I just want to clarify, and Noah probably already said this while I was getting ready for the hackathon. But yeah, we've reached out to them. The thing that's different about our database is that we're only putting in officers that have actually had sustained findings for internal affairs reports. So by their own system's judgment, they have been found, they don't use the word guilty. They say the finding was sustained. And so that way we don't have to be arguing about whether or not the officer did whatever we're saying they did. We're taking their word for it, that they did it, and using their report. And so when you look up an officer, it links right to the internal affairs reports. And it's just so we could skip that step about arguing about what was done or what was not done. And then we can say, hey, by your own findings, why are you moving this officer to another city? And our argument is that if you exhibit this kind of behavior, you don't get to be a police person anymore, and you can do something else. And maybe there'll be a system for coming back after you've gotten some anger management or something, right? We'll cross that bridge when we're lucky enough to get the bad apples out of the cart. So we're trying to buy into their own narrative that it's just a few bad apples and using people that have only been with sustained findings. And so we are trying to coordinate with Lucy Parsons Labs and of course their work and Freddie Martinez, who unfortunately couldn't be here this year. But that inspired the whole thing. I mean, of course. And if you people in the audience, if you're not familiar with Lucy Parsons Labs, get right over there. It's openoversight.com. It's a very easy to remember website. And also you can go to Lucy Parsons' lab site, who has a new beautiful website. And it's really a great way of just ramping up on what we're doing with public records, what can be done with public records. And there's really been a revolution over the last few years of journalists filing public records requests. People like Jason Leopold, who was actually inspired by Aaron's work when he became what is now known as a FOIA terrorist. So the government, if you ask too many questions, now you're a FOIA terrorist if you file too many FOIA requests. And, so we are moving forward with both local public records requests and federal public records requests. We're getting a lot done. And yeah, a lot of it was definitely just inspired completely by the great work at Lucy Parsons Labs. And also SecureDrop really was very inspirational. We were trying to figure out a way that we could fit in and help the systems that are in place. And so we're not sure, somebody might send us a tip and we may advise them to go use SecureDrop and do something with their information. And the idea was to have those channels open so that we could securely give someone some advice if we needed to, or maybe we would use SecureDrop to get some information to a journalist after someone gave us information. And that's why we're trying to have all these channels open. So thank you so much for suggesting that, Conor. That is perfect suggestion. All right, great. Okay, if there are any other questions, I'm gonna look at the, we have a little, we're keeping track of your questions because we wanna make sure that you can ask a question at any time for any speaker, and we'll keep track of it, and then it'll be there ready for when they come on. So I don't think there's any other questions for Noah.
Yeah, no worries. And if at any point anybody has a question, whether they're watching this recording later or later on in the day, they have a question for me, feel free to reach out to info@badapple.tools at any point in the future, and we will happily respond back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And now I'll go ahead and let Madison take it away. She's going to talk about our Oversight database, and then we're going to hear from MEC at the Internet Archive about their projects. Madison, take it away, Madison.
Thank you, Lisa. So hopefully one can hear me well, but in addition to the great overview that Noah gave.
Background noise? Is that just outside? Okay, no problem. Take it away.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So as part of the Bad Apple database, we also, in addition to the API and the internal affairs reports that Lisa explained, we also house a database of oversight commissions throughout the United States. Oversight commissions are a great way to give complaints a voice for citizens and hold departments accountable for officers' actions, which if you join me today in the hackathon, you will see is really important. So far in the Bad Apple database, we have over 180 commissions track, and some of which include the Community Advisory Panel in Hayward, California, the Citizen Review Board in Connecticut, and then the Office of Police Oversight in Texas. When you view the commissions on the website, you will be able to go and see all of the complaint information, view the members of the Oversight Commission, and get the contact info. And for this, if you have a complaint with an officer in your state, you'll be able to have all of the necessary information in one database. If you would like to help us with our Oversight Commission database today, you can join me in the hackathon, and we can find more Oversight Commissions to add. In addition, you can also add to our growing list of bad apples by helping me with a secured form, anonymized form, enter in internal affairs report data as well. So yeah, we have a lot going on my end. If you want to help kind of grow Bad Apple, either through the Oversight Commission or through internal affairs, or if you want to help me get information for PRAs, you can also help me do that as well. So there's a lot available to kind of help grow Bad Apple into this great all-inclusive database where we can see who our bad apples are and what needs to be done. So thank you, Lisa. That was probably much faster than yeah. So thank you.
Hey, that's okay. We're always happy to have things go faster than planned for a change. We're doing pretty good on time, and we are trying to keep it moving this time, just so everybody knows. We've got a schedule that we will be probably about 10 minutes behind, but basically on schedule, so that people can hop in and out and not miss the speakers that they want to see. So next up, we have Mech, who is going to tell us about the projects at the Internet Archive that you can hack on, and then go into his talk. Thank you, Mech. Mech, oh, I just want to say real quick. So Mech was somebody I met at the Internet Archive, I don't know how many years ago now, maybe 5 years ago or something. I can't remember. He was very inspirational to me as just the kind of person that we like having in Aaron Swartz Day, the kind of person that we want to work with, and that we were ultimately trying to protect in case they did something a little outside the box that would, freak out the establishment or whatever. And every year it's really interesting to hear what he has to say. So thank you, everybody. And here is Mech.
Thanks, Lisa. Really quickly before we jump in, I just wanted to see if anyone did have any questions for Madison.
Dope. Okay. I don't think we have any questions. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Matt.
I aspire, sure thing. I aspire for my talk to be as concise and useful. Madison, Noah, and others, really amazing work, and thank you for investing your time to tell us about it. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen as well here. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you very much. I'm really happy that we're still doing Aaron Swartz Day. And I know it takes a tremendous amount of time and energy. As you said, when I was in college, I was threatened with expulsion 5 times for different things, all of which were pretty white hat. But still, I'm very sensitive to when people are just trying to learn and explore, and how sometimes the society can be unfriendly to those people. So I would like to look a little bit at productive tools for learning today with a talk called A Learning Map, Navigating Books Without Borders. And as always, this talk is dedicated to Aaron and Ilya. All right, if you want to follow along on the slides, you can go to mek.fyi/ASD for Aaron Swartz Day 2021. And that'll bring you right here. Okay, one of my favorite quotes by Aaron is, "Information is power, but like all power, there are those who want to keep it for themselves. The world's entire scientific and cultural heritage, published over centuries in books and journals, is increasingly being digitized and locked up by a handful of private corporations." And in this spirit, Aaron and others helped establish this open book catalog called the Open Library, whose mission is to have a catalog of the world's books and make them universally accessible and useful. I wish Aaron was here to say this himself, but the 3 reasons that I think Aaron would have said Open Library is important is that books are such important artifacts, a repository of knowledge in our culture. To Aaron, it seemed tragic that these important cultural artifacts were not first-class places on the web. And also some important context at the time in 2006 is there was a nonprofit called OCLC who was charged with aggregating and compiling all of the book metadata at the time with libraries. And OCLC was changing their policy so that when libraries participated in this program, they could no longer claim rights to their own data. And Aaron felt that having an open alternative was really important. And so if you also believe that having an open library is important, why don't I show you really quickly what openlibrary.org is. So it's a catalog of more than 25 million works that you can learn about books. You can, as this onboarding carousel on the top says, you can read free library books or borrow them from the Internet Archive or from now Project Gutenberg, LibriVox, standard ebooks. Soon we'll have Wikisource and also OpenStax included there. You can use it kind of like Goodreads to keep track of your favorite books. And then we also have this really epic library explorer that Dreamy Cami created, which lets you browse the entire library in digital form and then enter different shelves. And so you can kind of zoom in on any of the different library catalogs. So if you want to help on openlibrary.org, there are a handful of ways that you can contribute. One is if you happen to know many different languages, or at least one other language, then try to offer a translation and internationalization of the openlibrary.org website. We have a whole set of instructions for doing that. You can improve our site performance, the accessibility of our website, so that it's more accessible to print-disabled patrons and other classes of patrons. Or you can help us with some known security issues. All of these have pretty detailed plans. You can just click on the link and then follow the instructions and choose a good first issue. Also, as I mentioned, we're now supporting other backends and sources for trusted book providers, such as Project Gutenberg, LibriVox, and we just implemented this in the past few weeks. So if you would like to participate in making that program better or suggest other libraries or book sources we may want to integrate against, this link is a great place to do so. All right, and if you want to build your own project, there are 3 things that you might want to take advantage of. The first is we have really good APIs on Open Library's website, and I have a tutorial that kind of walks you through using these APIs firsthand. We also have data dumps of our entire catalog. So if you would like to import all of the book data into your own project or do research, that's available to you. And finally, we created this thing called PartnerLib, which will look for ISBNs on a web page and automatically insert read or borrow buttons according to what books are available through all of our trusted book providers. And so if I go to bookshop.org, which is just an indie bookseller online, and then I drop in this code and then I press enter, then it decorates the page with these new borrow buttons that can take you directly to the Open Library experience. All right. Sorry. All right. So Aaron had an objective of helping give every book a page on the web. And I love that in terms of being able to help people access fundamental information. But ultimately, my life's mission is to curate an open, living map of the world's knowledge together. As Ted Nelson says, everything is deeply intertwined. And I want all of those relationships, the valuable relationships, to be surfaced. And here's a picture with me and Tim Berners-Lee and Ted Nelson, which was hard to get. And so sometimes connecting edges is not so easy. And if that's our goal, if our ultimate goal is to create a map of knowledge, there's a few steps that maps have to do. The first is summon the will to brave the seas. Then you have to survey and catalog the territory to identify what places even exist. Once you know what the places are, you need to understand the unique topologies of each place. You need to figure out how they're connected. What are the routes that get you from Greece to Italy? And then finally, there is a temporal aspect. So learn how factors like traffic, maybe you're in a traffic jam, or new constructions may affect these routes and the places they go to. So this talk, in fact, is the 5th part of a series that has happened over the course of several years. On Doing Good Enough is kind of why I'm at the Internet Archive working on Aaron's projects. The second talk was about why digital libraries matter and why we've been seeing increasing pressure to prevent libraries from making the jump to digital and the moral imperative that that represents. I've talked a little bit about library history and how we can make libraries extremely useful in the digital age, called Building a Library in the Matrix. Then finally, I worked with Nolan Wyndham and Jim Champ with a talk, Reading Between the Lines, which is how community and technology are helping the Internet Archive capture the essence of a book's genome. So if you've ever used Pandora before, where it analyzes all the music according to all these different attributes, we're basically having a robot that goes through and reads our books and sees how we can make those insights available in an open way, even if the books might be kind of locked in a library shelves. So visualizing this as a map, the first thing that the Internet Archive did and that Open Library did was try to create one web page for every book. just have the survey of the land. And today, because of the work of Brewster and everyone at the Internet Archive, the Open Library has more than 24 million works in its catalog, and 6 million of them can either be read or borrowed through the Internet Archive's controlled digital lending library. And it offers all sorts of features like browsing by author, subject, etc. And this is great. I think it gels really well with a quote from Vannevar Bush that says, his prediction, the Encyclopedia Britannica could be reduced to the volume of a matchbox. A library of 1 million volumes could be compressed into one end of a desk. And here's a picture of Brewster at one of the physical archives of the Internet Archive, just showing how many books we're really talking about. More than 6 million titles. And in fact, we are able to fit it into a few hard drives and access it directly from a phone. And so there have been some really, really compelling examples of people working on maps of books. Here's one example from the Open Syllabus Project. Open Syllabus Project is amazing. They've basically taken a computer and crunched through every possible college, university syllabus that they can find, and then do counts to say, what are the books or texts that have been referenced most? And you get an emergent picture of what books are valued by societies, and then you can kind of zoom in and explore different books within calculus, for instance, and how often that specific title is referenced. And so it gives you a cartography for knowledge, which is just very impressive. So amazing job to the Open Syllabus team. And we've seen other maps like this experiment from Google of trying to create an ocean of books that you can explore in a similar way. But what do you do when you want to find a piece of text or a URL within all of these books? It's not enough just to know the books exist. We need to start examining the topology and indexing it. And fortunately, we now have a way to do full text search and even find links within books. And then because it's a digital edition, you can click on the link and go directly to the source material, which is not something that you can do with a physical book. Just one way that the Internet Archive is making things more accessible for patrons. And so on this second layer of the manifold, we're really going into the book level. And you can learn more about that in the talk, How to Build a Library in the Matrix. This includes things like selecting text from public domain books, searching inside and across books, etc. And the next step after that, as I mentioned before, is the Open Book Genome Project and this thing called community reviews, which lets people in the community vote on the different aspects of books. And over time, we see an emergent answer of what are the books that are best rated for math, for instance, or vampire books. And this is a second way that you can help. If you're interested in participating in the Book Insight Engine, the bot that reads through our books and gleans insights such as reading level, the pace, summaries, extracting citations, or even comparing book similarity, then the Open Book Genome Project is open source. You can go directly to the website. We have a Google Colab notebook, which you can click and just step through each of the examples. And every quarter, we're trying to run the sequencer on the books within the Internet Archive so that we can glean new insights and make books more accessible to the world. So the real problem that I want to describe in this talk is if I finish a book a week, Carl Sagan says, I will read only a few thousand books in my lifetime, about 0.1% of the contents of the greatest libraries of our time. The trick is to know which books to read. And again, Vannevar Bush presciently says, there is a growing mountain of research. And this is back in, I think, 1945, around that time. But there is increased evidence that we are being bogged down as specialization extends. The investigator is staggered by the findings and conclusions of thousands of other workers. And I think Vannevar Bush would have been very surprised to see this query on Amazon showing that there are 30,000 results for calculus. And very naive or limited mechanisms for determining which one is best. And one of my favorite quotes from this Berkman talk that Aaron was giving about Open Library, which I felt like was very futuristic when I joined the project, is we want to let people add new kinds of relationships to Open Library. Like, this book was inspired by that book, or this book is a rebuttal of that book, or this book shows some serious errors in that book. And there's so much we can do with this. So the next stage in the map toward the center of the book is discovering latent relationships and connections and links between books. And when we have that, we're able to do some amazing things. Like, imagine if we were able to navigate the references and citations between every book and seamlessly jump from one book to another. We're soon going to be able to do that because of the work of Brian Newbold and others and their work on RefCat, which is an effort to look not only for academic paper citations, but also books using various sources. Or what if we are able to visualize what books people purchased in the order that they purchased them in? This was a wonderful interactive blog that used to exist called Yasiv, which had some great demos of exploring books based on their connections. And so one thing that we're doing within the Internet Archive is exploring how can people work together to identify what the best books are on any topic, and have a graph database, almost like a tournament of different books where anyone can vote, and then also use information from Open Syllabus Project to say, this book appears on 3,000 different curriculum. There are 100 people who think book A is better than book B, etc. And if that idea sounds cool to you, this is yet another way that you can participate. Thebestbookon.com is an open source project, which kind of sits side by side with Open Library and some of the other offerings at the Internet Archive. And you can volunteer, you can join our Friday calls, or you can try recommending a book or taking one of the issues on from the GitHub repository. Okay, so now we have an index of all of these different books. We've started to examine the topology of every book. We've identified some of the relationships between them, but once we have this graph, what is the map that we build on top of it? The main feature of the MEMX is the ability to tie two things together at will. In other words, to be able to associate two arbitrary items when wanted. The user is able to build a trail which can be shared with others and can also be published. So the MEMX might not make sense as a concept just from this paragraph, but I've built one for myself, which is basically an index of one's own thoughts. And I just want to type in MEMX, which is something I've jotted down before. And this just shows the power of a graph database if you use it for your own notes. It's like a version of Google custom tailored to your own thoughts. So I can go into the MEMX card and see that its inventor was Vannevar Bush. It's similar to mind maps. It's like the RDF framework. The definition is memory index. I can see that it was involved in a book called Glut, Mastering Information Through the Ages, which I can then enter and see that its author was Alex Wright. And I can see about Alex Wright and go directly to his website, for instance. And so if you have a graph and you have a system for a cartography and a navigation system for traveling different points, you can do some really magical things. And I want to explore how this also relates to learning. So we don't have time to watch this whole talk right now, but I highly recommend taking a look at Danny Hillis's The Learning Map from Open Source Con in 2012. Essentially what he's describing is a way, and here are two examples, of mapping a space of knowledge, for instance, probability and random variables and independent events, and showing how all of these different components connect to each other, and even showing how long something will take to learn. It's like a skill tree. There's a skill map. If you've ever played Age of Empires or Civilizations or used Duolingo. This example right here, Metacademy, is one of my favorite websites ever. It's a great proof of concept. Unfortunately, it's starting to bit rot, so this version is from the Wayback Machine, but it shows you an entire map, and each one of these points expands into a list of resources that you can then read or watch in order to learn a topic. And of course, you can click, I've already learned this topic, and then that bubble will fill in and move you to the next item in the map. There was also this excellent one by Khan Academy that similarly discontinued it, but this is just a 30-second clip. So let's see how it works in action. I'm not sure if the volume is going to come through though. So I'll let folks watch this on their own time. Basically what they're describing is that there's a list of different subjects like mathematics, and then each one of these subjects has exercises associated with it. And so, as Danny Hillis likes to say, you can map your own ignorance and see your education happening before your own eyes. Okay, there's another example that I thought was extremely compelling called Learny by Henry Pulver, which looks a little like this. It's a map of probability and statistics and linear algebra, and you can zoom in and then see all of these different subjects and then get resources for them as well. So what we really want is not just an index of books, and we don't just want a graph of books. What we want is Google Maps for books. We want a way to see that these are all of the books that I can read in order, or there are many different possibilities of orderings and substitutions in order to get from the Somerville of knowledge to the San Francisco of knowledge, even if it takes 276 hours. Hopefully next year we can follow the same trend, and we'll talk about how we learn Kung Fu just by sitting in the chair and having it, zipped into our head, but we're not quite there yet. And I'll leave you with one of Vannevar Bush's quotes, which is, "Wholly new forms of encyclopedias will appear, ready-made with a mesh of associative trails running through them." And imagine living in a world where a future world where being able to publish a new book is as easy as walking an interesting path through different paragraphs of a book. And suddenly you have a path of knowledge that you can share and anyone else can follow. I hope you'll help in building this feature. And if you would like help, let me know, and I would love to discuss further. Thanks from me and Open Library.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Mech. Always great to hear from you. And so much going on with the Open Library. And the Open Library and SecureDrop are kind of the two big projects that we've been able to keep alive. And I really appreciate you being here. So thank you very much. And I will check always as to see if we have any questions before I let you go. And aha, we have one. So someone's asking specifically, Taylor's Robots, Taylor Alexandra is asking, I guess, Taylor's Robots, mostly I have one book I want to scan, a book from 2001 printed only in India about the history of patents and why they're bad. And they emailed you and hadn't heard back. Is that a book that you would be interested in having scanned for the Open Library?
Well, let me check my inbox, and I can forward it to the right people at the Internet Archive who are most familiar with the processes.
Okay, what is the best email? What is the best email for that?
You can email me at mek@archive.org, and I'd be happy to forward it along.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Great. Okay, so next we have Brewster Kahle from the Internet Archive, the founder of the Internet Archive. And he's going to talk to us about how it's been 25 years now of the Internet Archive, and also a little bit about the future as we look towards making the decentralized web a reality. Take it away, Brewster. And Brewster is also a co-founder of Aaron Swartz Day with me. And it was he and I that decided after the San Francisco Memorial that we had to keep this going. So it's very special to have him every year. All right, take it away, Brewster.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you very much, everybody, for coming to Aaron Swartz Day this year. Next year, it's going to be physical. I tell you, it's going to be physical. I'm actually here in the Internet Archive in the San Francisco, and I'm in our great place here. Our statue of Aaron is over there. Anyway, completely fun and completely great. And we miss you physically, but I'm glad it's coming together digitally. And the answer is on that question, yes, we want that book in the Internet Archive and in Open Library if it's not already there. So the Internet Archive is turning 25 years old this year. And the idea is, you know, we're sort of looking back and looking forward. Looking back to figure out what has gone right and wrong, where we come from, and where should we go from here. Looking back, the idea, the Internet Archive was to build a digital library. I would say at this point, we really kind of have one. Yes, there's more to do, but now we can turn our attention towards making it more usable, filling in the holes, and really improving the tools. Aaron Swartz was an advocate, strong advocate of bringing public access to the public domain. That a lot of the public domain actually wasn't publicly accessible. That's kind of seems unintuitive to the layman, but to all of us in the field, it happens all the time. He wanted to make the public domain unpaywall as well. So not only could you go and see it, you could use it for different things. So for instance, he and Carl Malamud pioneered the US court case documents of going and getting the PACER public domain documents and getting them out into the open. And that spawned the RECAP project, and that's free law, and it's continuing on to this day. And we have now over 8 million cases, documents in over 8 million cases, and a lot of those cases have lots and lots and lots of documents, are now available on the Internet Archive for free download and free reuse and data mining, which is kind of awesome. So yes, there's actually more projects that Aaron helped participate in that are ongoing today. The Open Library Project, you also heard from MEC and sort of where that's going towards making sense of the books and the materials in the books. Sense making, I think, is another major challenge. Another was, how can we get the public domain materials that are locked up in things like JSTOR and Google Books to be publicly available? So you've got, it's not just for subscription-based people in very expensive university contexts. And he tried to get things available from JSTOR, and that didn't work very well. But after the fact, after Aaron died, JSTOR did reach out to the Internet Archive to make some of its public domain papers available. And so those are now 450,000 items on the Internet Archive's websites. I'm hoping that there are links that are going up. If not, I'll post those in later. We also are really working on other things that Aaron pioneered, was trying to get more access to journal literature. There has been an open access movement towards making things publicly accessible on the web. And people have been posting things, but those haven't been necessarily all that well brought together again for scholarly use. Google Scholar is awesome, but it's often of sort of publishers' points of view of the world, not the long tail. So the Internet Archive, and there's, you know, behind every one of these projects, there's awesome, wonderful people. I should probably list them, but it would take up all of my time. For instance, we launched this year scholar.archive.org, and that is an index to over 30 million papers, and also tries to have a catalog called Fat Cat of all of the papers, even if we don't have them, to understand what state they are in, if they're just paywalled or if they're in preservation someplace else. So scholar.archive.org is a new initiative of the Internet Archive to try to build this digital library. We're also digitizing periodicals for the print disabled, and also printing books at scale. So we're digitizing maybe 1 million books every year for the blind and dyslexic. We then also make as much of that we can available for free public download. We have some for under controlled digital lending, and we have most available through interlibrary loan. So we're trying to make it so that even if you aren't in an expensive university that's paying license fees to go and rent access to these databases, you can still get access and learn from these materials. We also want to then make it more available than even that, just making it available onesie-twosie, but to make it available in bulk so people can go and do this. The digitized books are coming in. The books to digitize are coming in for a large part from Better World Books, but we're now getting a large number more libraries and people individually going to the Internet Archive and offering to contribute. So if you say donate physical materials to the Internet Archive into your favorite search engine, you'll find instructions for how to send things, or if it's larger, how we can pay for the packing and shipping, or if it's even larger than that, we'll even send people. And we're now getting hundreds of thousands of materials that will then be preserved and then digitized as funding allows to make them fully publicly accessible. And great, we right now have a grant to go and digitize all the physical holdings of the Internet Archive. So it's a great day, and people are donating 78 RPM records, LPs, CDs. A lot of microfilm and microfiche are coming in, which is completely great. So that's building the library and trying to preserve it. Then we've been trying to make it more accessible by weaving the Internet Archive into the infrastructure of the web so that we can make people smarter and we can make the web smarter. One project, which I really, really like, is turn all the references blue. Can we make all of those footnotes turn live? Can we make them into clickable links? And we're starting with Wikipedia. So taking Wikipedia links, finding the footnotes, the references, and if they go to dead web pages or change web pages, then we put in an archive link. And we've now fixed over 10 million broken links in Wikipedia. Now go to the Wayback Machine to go and get a persistent link to a reference from that Wikipedia. We're now also weaving in links to books. So if there's a link to a book, trying to figure out what book it is, and if it has a page number, it goes right to the right page. You click, go right to the right page, and see whether that reference is right, whether they quoted it correctly. And how do we go and make it so that as good information is referenced within Wikipedia as we can for the contributors. And we've now got over 1 million links to over 300,000 different books. So the Internet Archive, being the master of the long tail, is going and bringing these materials to Wikipedia readers. We're now just starting on getting periodicals linked in the same ways. Because if things are linked, then they get more weight in Wikipedia. And we need Wikipedia to be as good and strong as we can. But imagine going and having any paper that you see in a PDF viewer come across in this way. And that is also so on its way. And it's starting to happen. So what we see now as for the next 25 years is continuing these weave knowledge into the infrastructure of our minds and our internet. Can we go and have the best knowledge be used and be at the right place at the right time, so you don't have to try to figure out how to go to archive.org to get it. It's right there from Wikipedia or wherever else. That is the opportunity of our time, is to go and build knowledge as infrastructure. And it takes some changes to some of the existing business models, and especially the points of view of some of the large corporate players. But a lot of them are coming around. Some of them are still suing libraries. But we hope they get over this idea that that's a good thing to do, and work with libraries that actually spend billions a year on publishers' products, that this is a good way of supporting publishers and authors, and shouldn't be things that could be sued away or licensed into oblivion, which seems to be some of the things that are going forward. So what do we do now? We need to go and make it so that the web is more preservable, that there's more things on the web, that we adapt to the next generation of technology. Maybe it's beyond the web. And the Internet Archive has been really pushing for and trying to inspire the decentralized web. Can we make it so that websites can live everywhere and nowhere? That we go back to some of the robustness of the old library system, where a publisher would come out with a book, it would go to hundreds or thousands of libraries, and if any one of those libraries disappeared, the book is still preserved. That's not how the web works. Can we make a decentralized web that does work that way, so that there's long-term preservation of ongoing live websites, not just snapshots of what websites look like in the Wayback Machine? So a decentralized web. And towards that, the Internet Archive has built a dweb.archive.org, which is trying to make the Internet Archive but decentralized as a technology pilot of some of these technologies. And we're starting to upload huge collections of the Internet Archive into the decentralized web storage systems like Filecoin. So we're starting with the end of year term crawl of federal and U.S. government websites from the end of the terms, and then uploading that as a test of, can we get terabytes, petabytes into the Filecoin network? And we are going to be working with other of these decentralized storage systems as well. So the Internet Archive, while it has things on hard drives that we own, but we're now starting to put them in places like into other nonprofits in Amsterdam, in Alexandria, Egypt, and starting to in Canada. So what should we do going forward? We need to help fight misinformation. We need to go and make it so that the world is a smarter place and not a dumber place because of this internet. And we have people sharing information at a grassroots level, but we have real constrictions at the corporate level. Some of the government things that are stepping in look actually really bad for this vision, but we have an urgent issue to try to provide context and information around what people are looking at. I think the next 25 years has got a lot to do with context, and just like Mech was talking about, it's not just to know that the book exists, it's what does it mean to the world? How is it interlinked, intertwinkled, Ted Nelson's line, into the rest of the world? We need large-scale data mining, and we need data mining for the public good, not just AI for corporate gain. How do we do this? We need to archive materials on the Internet Archive, and you can help with that. You can go and find things that should be archived and uploading them to the archive yourself, or asking for help from us at info@archive.org. Or you can work with the Internet Archive directly or indirectly to build on some of these tools, technologies, these information data sets, to go and build something kind of awesome. Together, we can really make something rock and keep the open aspects growing, blossoming, so that it's an interesting, fun, profitable, private, when you want it to be, world that is the promise of the internet. And we just have to keep it on these paths and on that direction and that North Star that basically Aaron embodied so very well. I'm Brewster at archive.org. Feel free to write to me. Back to you, Lisa.
Hey, thank you so much, Brewster. Really appreciate it. And really looking forward to the next 25 years of the Internet Archive and the decentralized web. Woo! Very interested in watching that pan out and connecting together the different applications. And we here at Aaron Swartz Day are committed to the decentralized web. It was actually something that Aaron used to talk about when he was a kid. And we're very interested in building that out. We used to call it the distributed web, that it just wasn't centralized, it was distributed, but now decentralized, it makes a better, is a better way of talking about it. And also, I had to get clarification just a little while ago between the decentralized web, which is the applications that are running on it, blockchain and things, and the D-Web, which are the applications running on it in a web-like way, what we think of as internet apps, but running on the decentralized web, and that's the D-Web. And the Internet Archive, I think, is going to be leading the way on that. So thank you so much for your talk. And next up is another person from the Internet Archive that is very important to Aaron Swartz Day. Tracy Jaqueth has been worked on so many things with us, including helping getting Chelsea Manning out of prison. She helped with all the different archives that we've set up over the years, Timothy Leary archives, other archives, all sorts of Aaron Swartz Day stuff. And then she's also very into the democratization of coding, tools that make it easier for people to participate. I really love these kinds of tools because I am not really a coder per se. I can do JavaScript and I know enough to be dangerous in terms of inserting variables and things like that into things that are interacting with websites. But I'm one of these people that can now do more because of all the great applications that are coming out. And Tracy's always the one to show me. I remember when Docker, what is that? Somebody needs to mute. Maybe Madison, mute. Thanks. I remember when Docker first happened and Tracy was like, I came in to show her something and she was literally sitting at her desk, like going like this, and was all excited about Docker, because you could put things in containers. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? But now I understand, and it's very, very important. And Chelsea Manning is also a big fan of Docker now, and she talks about her stream. Oh, and I should tell everybody at the end of this stream, we're all gonna hop onto Chelsea Manning's Twitch stream, which is just Twitch.com/Chelsea Manning 87. And so anyway, big family of people, and I love Tracy. She's very important person to me, and she's gonna tell us this year about using a dinosaur to democratize code. So take it away, Tracy.
Hello. Hopefully you can all hear me with the ear pods in. And I'm going to share my screen now. Welcome to the aquarium behind me. Okay, so today's talk is going to be about how JavaScript especially, but other languages are getting very exciting in terms of basically zero config, zero setup. So I wanted to show how you can start coding almost immediately right from your browser. You can debug from your browser and do all that kind of stuff. Because I believe, and I saw from Aaron when we worked together, that he felt that everyone should have the right to data, everyone should have some right to be able to code, and I think he would be very pleased with the way the world has moved, at least in terms of coding and democratizing that. So I kind of think of things as a coder as you're tending to go and fetch data. You want to go ahead and process it. You usually have to do something with it, and then you want to visualize it somehow, like in a web page. So I'm going to do like a little live coding here. I haven't done that before, so it'll be fun. And I have one little pre-canned thing. This is just a URL that gets some JSON from the archive. And I will just show you that JSON really quickly. Over. That's what we're going to visualize. Hold on, the thing's in my way. There we go. The data should be, where did I put the data? Sorry, too many overlays. Huh. Let me find it from my history. There we go. Okay, so it's some JSON data from the archive, and it shows each band, and then for every recording or item on the archive, what year that show is at. We're just going to be kind of non-granular, but it's a very long list. In this case, I'm getting 2,500 entries. So let's start there. So that's the 2,500 entries. We're getting the creator or the band name. We're getting the year, getting it as JSON because then you can import it nice and easily. And then this is just saying these are live concerts, and we're going to go from 1995 to sometime in the future, so the last 25 years. Okay, so to show you how easy it is to import JavaScript these days, I'm going to go ahead and import D3, and we have set up what's called a CDN, a content delivery network server. So you can get things that normally live in Node or NPM, and you can just get them right from our server without tracking you. So that's how your page, or how you'd be setting up your JavaScript page, would pull the D3, which is a graph visualizing program. If you've heard of jQuery, I'm just going to go ahead and grab that too. That just makes things a little bit easier to throw into the DOM and stuff like that. esm.archive.org. I'm in VS Code right now, so you'll see some auto completing. So I'm not typing as fast as it seems sometimes. I'm sorry for hearing the key clicks. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab one small piece of JavaScript that I already pulled down, because this person who wrote D3 had a really nice multiple graphing chart, but didn't ever publish it to NPM. So I just grabbed it, and that lives here. Okay, so that's the code we need to import for our setting up. There's one little quirk with D3. When you import it this way, I just have to set D3 into the global space. But now I'm ready to go. So now I've got my JSON, so that's the data that I want to do something with. So I'm going to go ahead and fetch it. That's what you do in JavaScript. So we'll say fetch the JSON. And it's asynchronous, so we have to do an await. And it's sort of quirky. Whoops. It's sort of quirky because you have to then parse the data back as JSON again. So we're going to go ahead and await that as well. And this is stuff you'll learn when you start programming in JavaScript. If you haven't already, it's pretty straightforward. And we can now start parsing the actual data. So I happen to know, and we can sort of see here if we can read the JavaScript, the JSON. There's a response header, and then there's a response, and then there's some docs. So we'll just go ahead and grab that. So now that's the list of the band names and JavaScript, and years in JavaScript. So now we're going to have to do a little bit of processing. So we'll make a little hash map called n that'll count the number of shows that a band has done. So we'll say for const e of JSON. So we're going to iterate over that little array there that we grabbed from the JSON parsing. And we will now grab the show name, or the band name. It's a strange autocomplete. Oh, right, it doesn't necessarily know what my data is yet. And we're going to add, it's basically doing plus plus, but we have to do it in a slightly different way because it might not be defined yet. So we have to say either use it if it's defined or start with 0, but it's basically just doing plus pluses. So now we have a list of all, we have an array or hash map of the band names and the number of shows that they've done over time. So now we're going to go ahead and sort it by the most prolific bands of all of our data. So this just is kind of quirky, but this is going to sort that hash map by value. And it's a little strange. Oops. So that's our n. We're now pulling it out as a list of tuples. And now we can go ahead and sort it. Oops. And this is how you can sort in JavaScript really nicely. So these are numbers. So I grab the second element in each tuple. And now at the end, because you can keep programming like fluently in JavaScript, as they call it, we're going to grab the 50 most popular bands. So that's the 50 most popular bands sorted, which is nice. So now we're going to do shows by year. So we're making another little hash map, and this one's going to be 3-dimensional. So it'll be, should be the bands by the year by the show count. So that'll give us 3 axes of data, which is what we're going to visualize on in our graph. So we'll say for, oops, I think I might have a typo here. Yeah, okay. For const e of JSON. So we're going back to our little JSON simple array, and we're saying shows per year over the band name equals shows per year e creator or an empty hash map. So this just says use it if it's already there. Otherwise, start with an empty hash map or dictionary or whatever you like to think of it as. Okay, so now we can go ahead and start using it. So we'll say the creator is our first dimension, the band name, and then the year is our second dimension. So we are now going to add 1 for every show that we see. So we have to do the same kind of little trick. It can be a little annoying, but I sometimes make little functions for this kind of thing. Okay, so if it's not set, it'll be 0. Otherwise, we're just counting it. And by the way, we can also just do this anytime we like if we ever want to see shows per year. So we'll see that in a browser in the debug console if we want to see what our data looks like, which is nice. Okay, so finally, we just have to do one last thing. We now need to transform it into X, Y, Z coordinates. So we're going to make a list of X, Y, Z coordinates from our data. So we're sort of processing, but it kind of works out. So we'll just call this like year to number. So we're now getting the, we're going to iterate over that prior 3-dimensional array. Oops, shows by year. So that's our first 2 dimensions that we're pulling out. And now we'll do one more little loop. And that will do, and we're almost done. Year n of, same thing, object entry. So this just iterates over this just iterates over a hash map and puts the keys and values into these left-hand side here. So we'll do year to n. So now we've got our n, or the number of shows. We've got the year, which is the year of the concert, and then we've got the band. So all we have to do is say xyz.push. Oops. And we're going to push a 3-element array because we can throw that right into our graphing function at the very top. Boy. And the first one is a date. It wants a date axis on the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and do the year. And obviously that won't be very granular, but that's okay because we'll still see it over the 25 years. And then we do the shows per year. And we just get the year. I probably could have gotten that. Could have probably just used the n value. I probably should have just used the n value. I don't know why I'm typing it that way, but that's fine. Shows. Yeah, let's just use the n value. That's easier. And then, so that'll be our y, the number of shows per band per year. And then we get a tooltip hover. So we'll call it, this is blinking at me. Oh, missing a comma. So there's a little red thing there. Okay, so that's the band, so that'll be our tooltip. Okay, great. So in theory, we have everything we need. So now we can just use jQuery and we can say we're gonna add something into the body or just replace the body altogether. And we're going to use the function from above, and you can see we get these nice little tooltips when you're in coding mode. So we just need to pass in our XYZ array, which is everything we need. And then we're just going to do a couple little things just to make it a little bit easier to visualize or see. So we'll do y label, and we'll say like archive concerts by or per year. Something like that, by yar. And then, sorry, this is sort of a quirky thing, but you have to pass in a function to give it the third value. Otherwise, it'll just always show 1. It's kind of weird. Don't worry about the syntax. Like once you start playing more with JavaScript, if you haven't already, it'll make more sense, but that just makes sure we get the right coordinates. I have to close these guys. Okay, so we should be good to go. So we've started with JSON and data. We've used importing from the live web or wherever. Doesn't really matter. You don't need any special things now. We've gone ahead and done a fair amount of processing. That's probably most of it. And then we're outputting it. So now let's see if this actually loads. And if it doesn't, that's okay, because I'll show you how you can how you can kind of debug. Okay, so it didn't load. That doesn't surprise me. There's probably like a syntax error. I won't do a lot of debugging here, but I'll show you at least how you can do one or two things. So I am loading this directly in, sorry, there's like a tooltip kind of hovering. How do I hide this stupid thing? There we go. Okay. Good. So it's saying there's a 500 on the CSS map. That's okay. I don't know. I'd have to look at if there's some, just shift reload. So I'm loading it as a file URL, which is kind of interesting. And you can see in the network tab, like what things it pulled down. So here's the D3 stuff. So we know that's loading okay. We know the, we think the advanced search is loading okay. Let's take a look. That's the preview. Oh, actually, yeah, that's the JSON. So that's loading okay. And we know jQuery looks like it's loading okay. So everything's loading okay. I'm probably just, if there's anything obvious to me right off the top of my head. But we're very close. So let me just show you, so we don't have to spend too much time on this, what this ends up looking like. So if we go to here, yeah, that's where my code lives. And that's the code thing that I pulled down. And when you use GitHub or GitLab, you have the option to use their GitHub or GitLab pages, which is free, and they give you a URL. So you can now see your data. So I could load it locally if I probably just have like one little typo somewhere because I was live coding, but now you can see the data. So this is a really neat graph. It shows you kind of a big set of data all at once, but then you can hover over it and see the bands. So it's, you know, like, what have we learned? Well, I don't know. Maybe we've seen like some bands were more prolific in the beginning or in the middle, but it's kind of an interesting way to view data. We don't have this kind of visualizer on the graph on the archive anywhere. So I'm hoping that this will encourage you to use our JSON APIs or other JSON APIs, use visualizers or other visualizers, and start playing with data. It's really easy to play with the data these days. And to just code, you can use the browser, like I was showing the little developer tools, and it's really neat. So I mentioned here how you can do that in Safari, and you can load a local file, so you don't even need a network. And if you want to load code from npm directly into the browser, you can do it with a CDN these days. If you want to do backend code, which is sort of the inspiration of this talk, you can use something called Dino, and Dino is it's from the creator of Node, and it's sort of like the next version of Node. So it does things like you can use fetch, which you can use in the browser, but now you can use in the backend, and you can pull code from anywhere just like you can in a browser now in the backend. So it's sort of democratizing how code is done. So anyway, I hope that was sort of interesting, and yeah, hopefully I will figure out my Zoom settings here and find the right window and hand it back to you, Lisa.
All right, thank you so much, Tracy. That was great, as always. And even though we have a joke about live demos, and now the internet always seems to take a poop on you right when you're doing a live demo, we made it through that one, and we will continue to do live demos.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important to, you know, it's fun. And that's why we like to do that. So a reminder that you can always ask us questions. I will get them to Tracy. We'll get answers back to you. And this hackathon today and our event is always about connecting people and growing our community. So thank you very much, Tracy.
Thanks, everyone.
Woo! All right, great. We now have Kurt Opsahl from the EFF, and he is the Deputy Executive Director and also Legal Counsel for EFF, and he is going to tell us what everybody has been asking me a lot lately about this Van Buren case and how exactly it applies to the CFAA and future cases, and also Aaron's case specifically. And then we're going to have Cory Doctorow up after him to talk more about the implications of all of that. So thank you very much for coming, Kurt. Take it away, Kurt.
Hello, everybody. Yes, good to see be here. Wish I could be there in person, everyone. So my name is Kurt Opsahl. I am the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Yes, I'm here to tell you about Van Buren, the recent Supreme Court case on the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So one second while I will share my screen for a slideshow. Let's see. This will just take 1 second. All right. So Van Buren, can get this on the screen. Very good. Van Buren was the first Supreme Court case to deal with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in many years. And so it provided more guidance than we have had. We could wish we could have had some of this guidance earlier. And what are the issues? Well, there's been a long and unfortunate history of CFAA abuse. Federal prosecutors, private actors, because you have a civil component to the CFAA, have exploited the vague terms and very draconian penalties that are within the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. In many bad instances, we have had in the United States versus Drew, criminal charges brought for violating the MySpace terms of service. In the United States versus Nozzle, this was criminal charges for violating an employer's computer use policy, and then very prominently for today, the prosecution of Aaron Swartz, where he had faced many CFAA charges, threatening up to 35 years in prison for downloading articles from the MIT network, the JSTOR articles, in violation of the JSTOR terms. So the underlying problem is that CFAA has vague language. It makes it illegal to access a computer without authorization or in a manner that exceeds authorized access. But Congress never defined what those terms mean. So the good news about Van Buren is it is a victory against these overbroad and aggressive CFAA interpretations. It overturned a dangerous precedent, the Van Buren's 11th Circuit decision, that permitted the CFAA criminal charges and civil claims based on these terms of service violations. And this also clarified the meaning of some of these vague terms, gave tools for their further interpretation. And this decision gives average power internet users much more comfort that they can use the web, can interact with websites, and not face criminal charges for violating some terms of service that they'll never read. They are long, complicated, and should not be criminally enforced. So since over the many years, there have been a lot of efforts for CFAA reform. And EFF has been working on those efforts for many years, looking for opportunities to reform the law. They have Aaron's Law, which was proposed in the aftermath of his tragic suicide, which included defining without authorization and making sure that is circumvention of a technical access barrier. This would be a necessary part of it, not on its own sufficient for a conviction, but necessary, because a technical access barrier, violating that's what hacking is. Getting onto a computer system in violation of term serve is not hacking, and the CFAA should be a hacking law. And second, very importantly, is reducing the draconian penalties. The overcriminalization of the CFAA allows for extremely serious, lengthy prison terms for doing things which can often have minor harms. And there are circumstances in which it may make sense for the law to say that this is something we don't want people to do, but it doesn't have to be something which is a felony that will be a life-changing event and will oftentimes, when used against people early in their lives, early in their careers who make a mistake, and bar them from being able to contribute their technical expertise for a long time because of the high penalties. So EFF has been filing amicus briefs in the major cases that are interpreting the CFAA and the state laws, usually state law equivalent in most states. And we also provide a lot of counsel through the Coders' Rights Project to security researchers, academics, and others who are trying to understand how the CFAA applies to their situation. So let's get to the Van Buren case itself. Van Buren was not a very sympathetic character. And one of the problems is bad facts can make for bad laws. So we'll go into a little bit of what happened with the Van Buren case. So Nathan Van Buren was a officer in the coming Georgia Police Department. And in the course of his duties, he developed a friendly relationship with a guy named Andrew Albo. He's a man in his early 60s who allegedly liked to hire young prostitutes and then accused them of stealing his money. And Van Buren apparently liked him enough to help out and handle some of these disputes between Albo and various women. But he didn't want to use that do that all for free, and so he decided to go to Albo after doing all this help and ask for a personal loan. He was falsely claiming it was needed for his son's medical bills, and Albo instead recorded that request and took it to the local sheriff's office, complaining that Van Buren had thought to shake him down for this cash. This got to the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they created a sting operation where Albo was going to offer to pay Van Buren cash so that Van Buren would tell him whether Carson, a woman Albo supposedly met at a strip club, was actually an undercover police officer. And Albo offered him $5,000, which was the amount of the personal loan that Van Buren had asked for, to search the Georgia Crime Information Center database from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the GBI, for a fake license plate number that they had made up for this state. And this would be in violation of the police department's policies. Their policies and training said you can use this license database for law enforcement purposes, but not for personal purposes. Now, I want to take a moment to note that, Van Buren's a bad guy. He's misusing his authority. He is, at least was intending to, as a fictitious license plate, fictitious person, but he was intending to totally misuse his authority as a police officer and violate the privacy of this Carson. However, evil as that is, it's not a hacking crime. And that's one of the challenges that come up often in trying to get good interpretations of criminal laws, is oftentimes people are very bad people, but the point is that it's not a hacking crime, and this should be limited to hacking crimes. So that was the question that was in the case. Was the license plate search exceeding his authorized access? And the federal prosecutors argued that violating department policies and training, prohibiting the misuse of this database, that was exceeding authorized access. So a jury convicted Van Buren. He appealed, and the Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit affirmed that conviction, finding that yes, violation of the terms could be a crime. And as we were talking before, this is a lot of interesting parallels to the accusations against Aaron Swartz, where violating the JSTOR terms were part of the alleged crime. And at this time, there was a split in federal appeals courts. Some courts found that violation of terms could be a crime. Some found that they weren't. The DOJ's position that it was a crime, and we needed some clarification on this. So goes up to the Supreme Court, and that's the good news. The Supreme Court reversed the bad 11th Circuit decision, and they adopted what they called the gates up or down approach. And then by gates up and down, they're referring to like a castle gate, a portcullis that would be lowered down for defense or raised to allow people in. So exceeding authorized access does not encompass violations of circumstance-based access restrictions on the employer's computer. Instead, is limited to someone who accesses the computer with authorization, but then obtains interest looking at particular areas of the computer, such as files, folders, databases, that are off limits, so access control limits. If you have access to one part of the computer but need a password to access a different part of the computer and you break through that, that would be exceeding your authorized access, even though you were allowed on the computer itself. However, if you're allowed on the computer and allowed to have access to that database, then the gates are up and we don't have a computer crime. So this is a tremendous victory for security researchers, for actually people all over the web, because it means that terms of service limitations on how you can use information or for what purposes you can access it are no longer crimes. And so the facts of the Van Buren case, he had every right to look up a license plate, but not for the purpose of giving it to someone for a bribe. the purpose to look for law enforcement purposes. So long as the computer is open, people can access this. And this happens a lot on other websites around the world where you have access to them, but there might be something in the terms about what you can do with the information after you access it. So this should be very helpful for internet research, security research. A lot of data journalism requires going able to scrape websites, pulling down information that is available to them and using them in ways that perhaps the website itself does not want to be done. So it had some further limits on broad CFAA readings. And I think one of them really should resonate with a lot of people because the court agreed with EFF's concerns about overbroad interpretations. They wrote that if the exceeds authorized access clause criminalizes every violation of the computer use policy, as the DOJ was arguing, then millions of people would be criminals. The courts found it difficult to see why it would not also encompass violations of restrictions on website providers' computers. And a nod to EFF and many other amici who wrote in about this issue, they recognized that the government's readings would criminalize everything from embellishing an online dating profile to using a pseudonym in violation of the Facebook real names policy or authentic names policy. The court said that the CFAA interpretation should be instead based on technology and technical terms. And they rejected a view in the dissent that we should look to the physical world of trespass as analogies. And this is a very key thing because statutory interpretation is what they were doing, and statutory interpretation often says you use the plain meanings of terms, but in this context, they're saying, looking at the history of the CFAA, what it was trying to do, you should look to technical terms that will guide the interpretation moving forward. They also found that damage and loss under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act requires harm to the computer system, to the systems of files, the data, and that misuse of sensitive data doesn't count towards the damage and loss. And this is particularly important because loss and damage are necessary to bring a civil CFAA claim. One of the weird things about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is it has both civil and criminal components in the same statute, which means that there are interpretations of the same word in both criminal and civil settings, when oftentimes there are different policy issues in criminal and civil settings. And this has led to some of the problematic interpretations of the CFAA. It'd be best to perform it, to separate these things, but as it is, there is a limitation on when the civil components do, and loss and damage is key to that. Then there's one issue that is a sort of a standout issue in the Van Buren case, the curious case of footnote number 8. So we have an opinion that has a lot of these good things we just talked about, but they insert a little footnote in there saying that we are not addressing whether it requires technological access barriers, code-based barriers, or instead looks to limit contained in contracts or other policies, which seems a little bit weird because they spent all this time saying about how you shouldn't be using website terms of service and other policies to find criminal cases. Now, to be fair, if they had made a decision on that, it probably would have been dicta. Dicta is a term for when a court says something in an opinion that is not actually relevant to the case in front of it. And in this case, there wasn't a technological access barrier, and so you might have said it would be dicta to rule about whether it needed a technological access barrier. It wasn't actually a fact in the case. But this footnote does leave some further interpretation down the road. So, and with this footnote, they neither adopted nor rejected a requirement that there be technical aspect. Now, we believe, AFF has argued both in the courts and in things like Aaron's law, that it must be hacking through a technological defense. That is the proper interpretation. Either we can interpret the law as it is to say that, to mean that, or actually make it explicit in the law. But the court did leave a bunch of clues in this opinion about what it thought about this. For example, later in the opinion, the court rejected a government argument that a rule against using a confidential data, a rule about how you would use it for non-law enforcement purposes, should be treated as a crime. That, coupled with the language we talked about above, we're talking about how millions of people will be criminals, strongly implied that there should be a technical access barrier, but that was left for another decision. So, coming soon, there is another decision, HiQ versus LinkedIn. This was another case before the Ninth Circuit, also about the CFAA. Both of them were on the Supreme Court docket at the same time. HiQ concerns also the without authorization provision. Well, this one was exceeds access. HiQ without authorization. HiQ was raising the question of whether scraping publicly accessible information after you receive a cease and desist letter amounts to a computer crime, and also the question of whether LinkedIn's IP address blocking was a sufficient technical access barrier. So they sent it back down to the Ninth Circuit to decide that case again, in light of what they just said in Van Buren. And in the Ninth Circuit case, HiQ was victorious. So a little bit about that case. HiQ began when LinkedIn attempted to stop its competitor, HiQ Labs, from scraping the information publicly available posted by users of LinkedIn. So LinkedIn sent HiQ a cease and desist letter asserting that HiQ was in violation of the user agreement and demanding them that they stop accessing it and saying that this would be a CFAA violation. Also, HiQ had systems that would throttle or sometimes block activity from suspicious IP addresses and had a bad IP address block list. So HiQ sued, which is a little bit of an unusual procedural posture. They didn't wait to be sued by LinkedIn, but rather sought a declaratory judgment that this the cease and desist letter should be taken down so they would be able to move forward and continue their scraping program without fear. And the Ninth Circuit held that the CFAA does not prohibit the scraping. So it was sent back down. It was argued before the Ninth Circuit on October 18th, a little less than a month ago. EFF filed an amicus brief. We actually had filed one in the original case. We filed again for this reconsideration. We argued that the court should adopt a rule that one cannot access a publicly available website without authorization, because those websites do not employ authentication or other technical systems that privilege such access. That IP address blocking is insufficiently secure or reliable to be considered an authorization system. Many people will change their IP addresses without even knowing it. They move from like going to a cafe to going at home, or if they're at home and they turn on and off their router and it gets a new IP address. It is not really a technical authorization matter. Instead, it must be a technical access barrier. Password gate is sort of a paradigm example that clearly prevents, or at least is putting up a barrier that dividing what is available to what is not available. So let's turn back to why it's relevant in particular for today. And if the Van Buren case had been out during the time that Aaron Swartz was being prosecuted, it would be clear that he should not have been prosecuted for downloading the JSTOR files. The gates were up. Aaron was allowed to access the JSTOR files. And Van Buren rejected Ortiz's, the United States attorney, the theory that violating these JSTOR terms made the access criminal. JSTOR did do some IP address blocking. I think as properly interpreted, at least as we're hoping that the HiQ case will do, that IP address blocking does not bring the gates down. And moreover, JSTOR ultimately didn't want to prosecute and pulled back, but Van Buren would have, its description of loss and damage would have undercut any possible civil claim that JSTOR might have made. But the fight for reform continues. Van Buren is a critical start. There's more to be done. The tragic and unjust results of the CFA misuse against Aaron Swartz should never happen again. Moving forward, we'll need to guide the court's interpretation of Van Buren, resolve the ambiguity of footnote 8, ongoing with HiQ, at least in the Ninth Circuit. We'll make sure that there's a good interpretation there and in every other circuit, or maybe back to the Supreme Court. And also, untouched by Van Buren, and may need statutory reform, is the draconian penalties. Penalties of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act must be proportionate to the offense and should not be facing years and years or even decades in prison for accessing a computer, especially in a way that does not do substantial harm. What we want to make sure is that computer crime laws are not chilling security research, journalism, and other novel or interoperable uses of technology that will ultimately benefit all of us. So thank you all for listening. I'll be happy to any questions from the audience.
Okay. I'm going to check real quick because we do have our little running list of questions. And if not, I have a couple of questions of my own that I will ask. Okay. Okay, cool. We're cool. So basically the point is, in a nutshell, that Aaron was an employee of Harvard at the time and had access to the JSTOR database, and therefore we could argue about what he was going to do with all the articles later, although we're pretty sure he was going to conduct big data research on those. But it was definitely not hacking,
Right.
accessing the database, correct?
So that is the thing. He had access to the database. Now, they may not have wanted him to access it in that manner, not going in and plugging into a server in the closet, or the amount or speed at which he was doing it. But all of those are policy restrictions. The gates were up under the Van Buren analysis. And then there is some questions like, what was he going to do with them? So that is something that could be addressed, perhaps, if there was a civil dispute afterwards, but it doesn't make it a crime. And that is sort of a really important thing. If you give people access to something, you shouldn't be able to have hidden terms or terms that are not enforced by technology turn it into a crime. You don't have these kinds of disputes enforced with the power of the criminal law. And the tragedy is that this interpretation, I guess an important thing to understand about Supreme Court interpretations of the law is what they're interpreting is what the law has always meant. So they're not changing the interpretation, but recognizing the interpretation. And what Van Buren did was recognize that that's what the CFAA meant, but we didn't understand that at the time. Or we didn't, but Carly Ortiz didn't understand it at the time, leading to this prosecution. And unfortunately, we weren't able to change that interpretation or clarify that interpretation at the time. But just sort of a great tragedy that a law that was not intended to do that, allowed to have, was about putting up barriers that didn't exist here, not about going after people who had access to the material, was nevertheless used to threaten somebody with 35 years in jail.
Right. Yes. And a shout out, bop over the head to Carmen Ortiz and Stephen Heyman for being career prosecutors and U.S. attorney who didn't take Aaron's fragile character into account when they went after him tooth and nail on his grand jury. So always nice to get that out of the way. There's a good post by Dan Purcell, one of Aaron's attorneys, called "Aaron Was Not a Criminal," that I will post on the Twitter after this. And I think we have a question from Cory Doctorow. No, we don't? Oh, okay. We don't have any questions. We don't have any questions, Kurt, because you explained that very well. And everyone understands it. And this is why I really appreciate you coming on personally to explain this very important issue to us. And thank you very much for coming.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take it away.
All right, great. So next, we're going to go to Will Howes, who is an Aaron Swartz Day volunteer that hopped on a plane to come to Aaron Swartz Day a few years ago and has been a very important volunteer for Aaron Swartz Day ever since. And I get emotional, sorry. It's the first time I knew I wasn't going to make it through the day. I've been doing so well. But I'm going to let Will introduce Cory. So here you go. Take it away, Will.
All right, so it is my distinct honor to introduce Cory Doctorow, science fiction author, award-winning, notably, currently the EFF Special Advisor, or an EFF Special Advisor, notably the author of, I guess we're going back to author, of Little Brother, a book that I sort of magically came upon in the library in 7th grade that, opened my eyes to the rest of the world and is, certainly one of the reasons I'm here today. So without any further ado and with, a big round of applause, I am happy to introduce Cory Doctorow.
You're muted, Cory. Whoops.
I have 2 mutes. It's not a Zoom conference until someone speaks while muted. Hi, thank you very much. That was a very kind introduction, and it's an honor to be back at Aaron Swartz Day. Thank you, Lisa, for organizing this. So I was reflecting this morning that the internet we use every day today is a very different internet to the one that Aaron left behind, and one that he might struggle to recognize. He did not leave us in a world where the internet consisted of 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. That was something that's happened in the years since. And to understand how we got to this place where the internet is, on the one hand, feels like a lot harder to stick up for, and on the other hand, feels a lot scarier. There are a lot of different explanations, and many of them come out of economics. So if you've ever heard people talk about this in policy and econ circles, chances are you've heard someone use the phrase network effects. Network effects describe when a product or service gets better because more people are using it. So Facebook's a kind of good network effects story. Every time someone joins Facebook, that's a reason for other people to join Facebook because their friends are there now. And network effects really do work, right? They are how tech achieves scale. Every time someone made a Microsoft Office document, that was a reason to buy a copy of Microsoft Windows, because that was where Microsoft Office ran best, and that was a larger pool of files that you might access. The more people there were who had Windows, the better reason there was to use Microsoft Office. Same thing goes for the Apple App Store and all kinds of services that we're used to using. But even though these companies have grown to this incredible scale through network effects, there's a much more important economics idea that doesn't really get talked about nearly enough. And it's one that really relates very closely to the story of Aaron's life, and that's switching costs. Switching costs are what economists use to describe all the stuff you have to throw away or give up when you change from using one product to another. So if you leave Facebook, you leave behind your friends. If you leave the Microsoft Windows, Microsoft Office universe before there were lots of interoperable versions of Word and Office like iWork Suite and LibreOffice and Google Docs, you would leave behind all the documents you'd created and would struggle to access them afterwards. If you leave behind iOS, you lose your apps, and if you leave behind Audible, you lose your audiobooks. Those switching costs, they're not natural. They don't arise out of nowhere. They are engineered in. In fact, if you look at the latest filings in the FTC's amended complaint against Facebook, you see all these memos from Facebook executives to Zuck saying things like, well, it's really important that we make Facebook photos work really well so people will entrust us with their family pictures, because once their family pictures are locked up inside our walled garden, they'll have to pay a very high switching cost. They'll have to basically leave behind their memories to leave Facebook, and we can treat them a lot worse and make a lot more money without worrying about them quitting, because we'll have imposed this high switching cost. And those high switching costs are a feature then and not a bug. And to attain high switching costs, to be able to take your users hostage, you need to add engineering to the system, because by default, computer systems and the networks they run on are intrinsically interoperable. They have low switching costs. If the entire internet is made up out of Gopher and you invent the web and everyone's using Gopher, all you need to do is add Gopher support to your web browser, as like NCSA Mosaic did, and then you just never need to use Gopher again, and you can still access all the things that are on Gopher. If you were to leave your email provider, you could just keep your address book and email everyone that you were emailing from your old email provider. And if you switch phone carriers, because we have a mandatory standard for number porting, you don't even have to tell anyone your new phone number. You just keep your phone number. It's completely invisible to the other people that are part of your network. The switching costs are effectively zero. And so switching costs are a way to take big firms that have gotten big through network effects but have stayed big by taking us all hostage, and freeing the hostages, knocking down the walls through interoperability. And standards are one way to get that. And, Aaron did his share of standards work. I've done my share of standards work. And standards have their place, but, honestly, they're very easy to corrupt because standards are a sort of proceduralist game that are won by the last person who gets bored. And it's pretty easy to, if you've got a lot of resources, to take over a standard. Beyond standardization, there's another form of interoperability, the kind of interoperability that Aaron was quite fond of, which was adversarial interoperability. That's when you take a thing that already exists and you plug something new into it without their permission. Like maybe there's a service called JSTOR, and the way that you normally access articles on it is by clicking on links. And you can instead create a small program that iterates through the links and clicks on them for you. That's a form of adversarial interoperability. And it's no different in practice to the form of adversarial interoperability that was practiced by the likes of Apple. Back in the early 2000s, the Mac was really on the skids because Microsoft Office for the Mac was really bad. And so if you worked in a mixed office environment, the only way you could communicate with your colleagues really was by having a Windows machine on your desktop. I mean, I ran big networks back then. We tried, we'd give our designer who had the Quadra or the PowerPC, we'd give them a copy of Office for Mac, but when someone sent them a Word file from a Windows machine, it wouldn't open, or if it did open and they saved it, it'd be corrupted, or then no one else would be able to read it. And eventually we just started giving them Windows machines, and then after that became too cumbersome, we just started buying things like Quark and Adobe for Windows and taking away their Macs because there was no other way to make it work. Steve Jobs knew this was a problem. He didn't solve it by asking permission from Bill Gates. He moved fast and broke things. He went off and had some engineers reverse engineer the Microsoft Office file formats. He created iWork Suite. It included Pages, Keynote, and Numbers, and they read Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files. And it's interesting because after the switching cost to go to the Mac got really low and they ran that switch campaign, Microsoft stopped playing games with their standards because it cost them a lot of money to have all these non-interoperable versions of Office. And once there was no advantage to it, they just went and standardized it. That's when we got PPTX and XLSX and DocX, these XML versions, again, another Aaron shout out there. And so, one of the ways that you can get to standards is by having adversarial interoperability. Now, I should say at EFF, we started using the phrase competitive compatibility, or ComCom. Adversarial interoperability is hard to pronounce, especially for non-English speakers, and it shortens to AI, and that already means something. So we say ComCom, competitive compatibility. And I want to tell you a tale today of two different kinds of ComCom, both relating to Facebook. The first one is one that I'm sure you're familiar with, a company called Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica created a deceptive quiz that it used to exploit a loophole in a Facebook API that allowed it to gather information not just on the people who took the quiz, but also their friends. Facebook designed the API to work this way, but they didn't anticipate, or they said later they didn't anticipate that it would work this way. And Cambridge Analytica created a lot of privacy harms for a very large pool of people. We can discuss some other time what those amounted to. I'm skeptical of the claim that, an evil Republican billionaire used machine learning to make a mind control ray that turned your uncle into a QAnon racist. I think your uncle might have been a QAnon racist all along. But, leaving aside whether you think it worked or it didn't work, it's definitely not how we want these big services to work, right? If you're holding on to a bunch of user data, there are some adversarial interoperators, some ComCom practitioners, who you really don't want to have inside your network doing stuff because they harm your users. But let's talk about another ComCom user who is in trouble with Facebook. It's a project from the NYU Engineering School called Ad Observatory. It comes in two parts. There's a browser plugin called Ad Observer. If you're a Facebook user, you install this plugin, and whenever you see an ad on Facebook while you're using it, it just grabs the ad. It grabs the HTML, it grabs the image, and it uploads it to the other part, which is called Ad Observatory. An Ad Observatory, it's just a gallery of ads that have been shown to Facebook users with their associated metadata. And the reason this exists is that Facebook promised after the 2016 election that it would do something about paid disinformation that was floated on Facebook using its ad platform and pushed out to a lot of users. And they have failed. They're either really bad at it or they just don't care. Because the one thing that we find over and over again with Ad Observer and Ad Observatory is that there's a ton of paid political disinformation on the platform that Facebook said it would stop. Now, Facebook says that it needs to kill Ad Observer and Ad Observatory because if it doesn't have the absolute authority to decide who can plug stuff into its network, then it won't be able to stop the next Cambridge Analytica. So Cambridge Analytica moved fast and broke things. Ad Observatory moved fast and fixed things. Facebook says we just need to stop everyone from moving fast, whether they're fixing or breaking things. And, let's ignore for the moment the obvious fact that Facebook has permanently disqualified itself from being the entity that defends us from Cambridge Analytica the day that it allowed Cambridge Analytica to attack us all. Like, they're surely not the people we do want to entrust with that. And let's ask instead, if we're going to protect Ad Observer, how do we prevent Cambridge Analytica? Like, how do we make a tuna net that we don't get dolphins stuck in? What does a dolphin-proof tuna net look like? Well, currently the way that we do this is with a bizarre kind of fugly hack. We have a whole bunch of private laws, like Section 1201 of the DMCA. That's a law that says that it's a potential felony to give people tools to reverse engineer DRM. Companies use this all the time now. They just add enough DRM to their product that to do anything useful with it, you have to remove the DRM, and then they just say, okay, anything you've done that we don't like, per force had to involve removing DRM, and that's a felony, so we'll come after you. We have legal theories like tortious interference with contract. Basically says, if I have a user agreement that I make my users click through, and then you do something that makes it easy for them to violate that user agreement, like, if every time you join Facebook, you have to click a long garbage novella of legalese that says, by being dumb enough to use Facebook, I promise that Mark Zuckerberg can come over to my house and punch my grandmother and wear my underwear and make long distance calls and eat all the food out of the fridge. And then I make a tool that keeps Zuck out of your house and teaches your grandma to defend herself from Mark Zuckerberg. They say, oh, that's tortious interference. You're helping our users violate a contract they entered into with us. And then, of course, we have this Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, right? We have this law that, as you heard Kurt describe, allowed companies prior to the Van Buren decision, and now to a lesser extent after the Van Buren decision, allowed companies to just define things as illegal. It is, all of these laws taken together, they are what amounts to a kind of felony contempt of business model, to use a phrase from Jay Sorek, the founder of Cydia, who's just filed an antitrust lawsuit against Apple. Go Jay. And felony contempt of business model was what we saw when they came after Aaron. Aaron, there really isn't a question about whether Aaron was allowed to access the articles that he downloaded from MIT's network. The question was whether he downloaded them in a way that interfered with the business model of the people who were hosting them. Not whether they'd given him permission, not whether it was illegal, not whether he was violating copyright, but whether he was making their investors sad. And the idea that we are going to somehow defend our privacy and other legitimate interests just by giving companies the power to use like any law they have lying around to defend those has some pretty obvious problems. Like, for one thing, there may be privacy abuses that aren't covered by this weird melange of contract law, cybersecurity, tortious interference. There may be other forms of abuse, fraudulent offers and other things that we would want to prevent that just aren't covered by those things. If you want to defend privacy, there's a pretty obvious path in law to defending privacy, and that's to have a law that defines what our privacy rights are, which, may surprise you to hear, America doesn't have. We do not have a federal privacy law. And the fact that we don't have a federal privacy law, we don't have a broad data protection law, that our anti-fraud laws have thus far not done the job, and so firms are turning to copyright and tortious interference and cybersecurity law to settle these criminal acts on their networks. That is not cause to give companies more leeway to create more errands in the service of protecting our interests and their shareholders' interests and, you know, deciding when those two things are in conflict, sort of leaving it up to them to decide who wins. Instead, we need these laws to be freestanding laws that are passed by our legislature. And in particular, we need these laws to have what's called a private right of action. So this is kind of the flip side of private law. Under private law, a company gets to decide what the law is. And under a private right of action, every person has the right to decide whether the law needs enforcing. And so private right of action means that if your privacy was abused by Facebook or by Cambridge Analytica, or even by AdObserver, who, you know, for the record, aren't abusing anyone's privacy, if your privacy was abused, you would have the right to go to court and seek redress for it. And, you know, that is the kind of Aaron Swartz model, right? Rather than convincing some attorney general or some district attorney that someone's rights have been violated, you could say your rights have been violated and you could go to court. And that private right of action is pretty controversial among big businesses. They all say the same thing. They say, oh, well, think about the nuisance lawsuits that we'll get. Well, that's another way of saying, think about what happens when everyone who we wrong, and not just the people who are connected enough to get a district attorney or another federal official to take action, when they get to seek redress for the harms that we visit upon them. Now, we obviously need these laws. And the fact that we don't have these laws, I think it's the inverse of Aaron's most important fight, the fight over SOPA. Right? Aaron said that you know, that we needed to not keep passing bad cyber laws. He was right. But, you know, the corollary of that is like, why aren't we passing good ones? Back in 2010, Aaron very memorably said, it is no longer acceptable for a politician not to understand the internet. It's a phrase that I hold dear in my heart. But, you know, I think we need to contrast it against a remark that was made by Upton Sinclair many decades before in 1934, in which he said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. So we live in an age of very complicated technical questions that you or I can't resolve on our own. I mean, maybe, you know, the people listening to this are qualified to distinguish the Cambridge Analyticas from the AdObservers, right? The people who are moving fast and breaking things from the people who are moving fast and fixing things. And maybe some of you are technical enough that you can like do the cell biology to figure out what's right and wrong about vaccines. Maybe some of you are respirologists and you can figure out what's right or wrong about masks. Are any of you metallurgists who can tell me whether the standard that defined the reinforced steel joist over my head was any good and whether my ceiling is going to cave in on me? You know, I drive a Kia. They had a big data breach. Can anyone tell me whether I can trust the anti-lock brakes? My kid is going to Zoom school off and on. Is anyone a pedagogist who can tell me whether it's going to make her an ignoramus? There are more technical questions than any of us can resolve, no matter how smart we are, no matter how much research we do, no matter how much time we spend trying to parse out and be responsible citizens who make informed choices. Ultimately, the way that we know whether we can get a Boeing 737 MAX now that they're flying again and not worry about it falling out of the sky is not by mastering avionics and aviation and aerospace engineering. It's by having a process that we trust, a process of truth-seeking in which complex technical claims about what is and isn't true are adjudicated by experts who are neutral and work for us, the public, and they show their work when they make a decision, and then they revisit their choices when those decisions are challenged by new evidence. And it's been a long time since we had anything recognizable as a good truth-seeking exercise in our halls of power. As our firms and industries have become more concentrated, those truth-seeking exercises have turned into something that looks a lot more like an auction, where big companies decide what the truth is. And, you know, one of the things that helps them decide what the truth is if the industry is concentrated down to the point where there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 companies who can all get together, sit around a table, and make that choice. You know, a lot of us in 2017 saw that picture of Donald Trump sitting around that table at the top of Trump Tower with all the leaders of the tech industry, and we were appalled to see these technologists meeting with this you know, bigot, strongman. And sure, that was alarming, but I think we should be even more alarmed by the fact that they all fit around one table. You know, once everyone does fit around one table, they will sit around one table. And once they're sitting around one table, they're going to figure out how to collude, to pervert the process, to make it harder for us to know what is and isn't true, to know what is and isn't good policy, to convince our lawmakers that we need a freestanding privacy right and not for companies to just have the right to declare anything to be illegal and say, well, we'll only use this in service to our users' privacy. So, you know, you may have seen that there's a lot of antitrust action right now. The presumption that it's okay for companies to buy or merge with their rivals, to engage in predatory pricing and other historically unlawful anti-competitive conduct, that idea is kind of past its sell date, and policymakers are revisiting it, long past due. But it's going to take a long time to get any action out of that. I mean, if you're my age, I turned 50 this year, you probably remember exactly one major breakup that antitrust enforcers managed. That was the breakup of AT&T in 1982. And people go, oh, that took like more than a decade. It took like 12, 13 years for AT&T to get broken up. It's actually not how long it took for AT&T to get broken up. The first antitrust action against AT&T was in the teens. It took nearly 75 years to break AT&T up. It is a slow-moving process, because by the time a company is a monopoly and is extracting the monopoly rents, the high profits that are the reason that companies form monopolies, it is able to amass both influence and money that it can use to beat back attempts to break it up or hold it to account, right? The best time to enforce anti-monopoly law is before you have monopolies. Once you have them, they're really hard to get rid of. An ounce of prevention is really worth a pound of cure here. And so, you know, you can see this play out over and over again. You know, the other antitrust case that wound up in 1982, the year that they broke up AT&T, was IBM's antitrust case. IBM spent 12 years itself in antitrust hell, being investigated by the DOJ. Every year that it was in antitrust hell, IBM's legal bill, just for that one lawsuit, was more than the HR bill for all the lawyers in the Department of Justice antitrust division. IBM had so much money that they could literally hire more lawyers than the US government to defend itself. It's no surprise that after 12 years, it walked away effectively unscathed. Now, it's not to say that we can't and shouldn't try to take muscular enforcement action against monopolists, but if all we're going to do is wait until finally those processes run their course, it's going to be too late. It's going to be a lot of people who get ground up in between, right? The only thing worse than losing Aaron would be doing nothing about all the future Aarons that might get caught in the teeth of this system. And so I think that this is where Aaron-like tactics, this interoperability stuff, really comes in, because, you know, antitrust used to be enforced. Antitrust might be enforced tomorrow, but right now we're not going to get much out of it. That's a classic jam yesterday, jam tomorrow, no jam today kind of situation. But if we allow for interoperability, it has some really significant immediate effects, right? If you could plug new services like Mastodon or Discord or Diaspora into Facebook, you could leave Facebook and still stay in touch with the family members, the communities, the friends, the customers that you rely on Facebook for, but you could have your own policies. You could have your own policies about what data is collected. You could have your own policies about how it's used. You could have your own moderation policies. You could kick off the bullies that Facebook wouldn't kick off that make your life hell. Or you could permit the kind of speech that Facebook keeps blocking, like if you're part of Black Lives Matter, or you're a trans rights activist, or you're a sex worker who's getting caught up in things like a real names policy, you could jettison that policy and you could have your own rules and your own space. We could enable people to have technological self-determination. We could let people not just be present and have a voice in the design of Facebook. You know, you hear this from the disability rights movement. They say nothing about us without us. Ask disabled people, people with disabilities, what they need, rather than making up out of your own impressions of what it means to be a person with a disability, what accommodations would help. But you know, the apotheosis of nothing about us without us is nothing about me without me. That at the end of the day, my own use case is one that I will always understand better than any design team, than any firm, than even a committee, a multi-stakeholder committee of people who are supposed to be similarly situated to me. That ability to adapt the tool to your hand, it's key to the hacker ethos. It's what made us all so excited about computers in the first place, because they were so malleable. But it's also, you know, something that people have enjoyed since the first person chipped an axe head out of stone and made it fit their hand. Let me see if I can find there's my stone axe head, right? Like, here's some interoperability for you, right? This is a 70,000-year-old stone axe head. And the person who made it fit their use case. They didn't have to rely on someone else to tell them what the optimal axe use was. They got to design it for themselves. If we give people interoperable tools, if we let them out of the walled gardens, if we free the hostages, then not only do we maybe stay the hand of the people in the design briefings at these large companies who are trying to decide just how badly they can treat those users before they leave, because we make it easier for them to leave. But if we don't stay their hand, if they decide to abuse users anyway, then we give users somewhere to go. We make it easier for them to seize the means of computation, to be in charge of their own technological destiny. And so there are a lot of paths to making that happen. Here in the US, there's the Access Act working its way through Congress. In the European Union, there's the Digital Markets Act. We've seen some recommendations in the UK from the Competition and Markets Authority, and Canada, which has been pursuing just an absolutely terrible approach to this, may be reconsidering it. I've had some emails from people in Parliament lately about this, so maybe we'll get something better out of there. And you know, there are things that we can do administratively. We don't have to wait for Congress to act. Like, not only could the administration act, but they should act to promote interoperability by saying, we're just not going to buy anything anymore from a technology provider or a vendor unless it's interoperable. Like, you wouldn't build a VA hospital where the contractors who built it said, we're the only ones who are allowed to like plug things into the wall or change where the plugs are. We're also going to keep all the math we use to calculate the load stresses and the atrium a secret. And there's no as-built diagram showing you where the network cables, the power cables, and the water and sewage are, right? That is not a good hospital. And anyone who insisted that that was the condition under which they were going to sell Uncle Sam a hospital, they should be sent packing. And yet here we are, every school district in America last year procured licenses for Google Classroom without insisting that they be allowed to plug in arbitrary tools for textbooks, assessment, and so on into Google Classroom, right? That's just dereliction of duty. The US government just shouldn't buy anything, nor should local or state governments buy anything unless it comes with interoperability. And that interoperability could take the form of a promise that says, by selling this stuff to the government, we promise that, you know, your motor pool vehicles, that we're going to allow independent mechanics to fix them by providing an independent parts stream and service manuals and access to diagnostic codes. You know, this is a very old principle in good governance. In the US, it goes back at least to the Civil War. During the Civil War, the Union Army, Lincoln's army, they refused to buy rifles from gun manufacturers unless they hewed to a standard, unless they had standard parts and ammunition. Because again, they were like, okay, yeah, you guys need to make a profit. That is not as important as us having working rifles wherever we are. We're not going to be beholden to you. So we could do that up and down the entire supply chain. And when you think about all the different things that the US government buys, phones and tablets and cars and planes and network services and so on, you know, we could use procurement as a huge lever without any congressional authorization to completely remake what's available, not just to government customers, but to all customers, and ultimately to everyone in America and perhaps around the world. Because, you know, once those services are interoperable, they're interoperable. Once the diagnostic codes for all the cars the US government has bought are available to the US government, it's inevitable that they'll be available to all of us. We might also see other means of solving this, means that might arise from the prosecutions, antitrust prosecutions, these big firms. You know, if the FTC ends up entering into a settlement with say Facebook, which is a thing that they usually do when there's an antitrust complaint. That's been the usual method for the last couple of decades, that whenever a company is looking like it's going to lose, it offers a settlement. That settlement could come with the requirement that they take on a special master. That was the job Larry Lessig got after the Microsoft antitrust settlement, before they got it appealed. And that special master could be in charge of when they get to sue people. You know, they could say, look, I see you want to sue AdObserver for a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act claim, or a tortious interference claim, or a reverse engineering claim under DMCA 1201. I'm going to look at that claim before I let you file it, to make sure it's not pretextual, to make sure that you're actually trying to protect your users and not just your shareholders. So I want to close by saying that the problem with what happened to Aaron was not that someone who operated a service objected to a third party altering the way that that service worked. The problem is that they could convert their objection into a legal right that, as Kurt said, the state would enforce on their behalf. And dominant companies are not, or rather interoperators are not the only people who can do bad things to their users. Dominant companies can also be as harmful. You know, Cambridge Analytica took our data and did a bunch of bad things to us with it and invaded our privacy. Facebook takes our data and does bad things with it and invades our privacy. We don't just need a law that stops Cambridge Analytica from taking the data that Facebook has on us and abusing it. We need a law that stops Facebook from taking the data that it has on us and abusing it. So the existence of Cambridge Analytica shouldn't be a reason that allows Facebook to kill AdObserver. But likewise, the existence of AdObserver shouldn't mean that someone like Cambridge Analytica, or even Facebook itself, gets off the hook for the bad acts that they do, the harms that they visit on us. We need to get rid of felony contempt of business model, but we need to put something in to fill the void. We need rights for interoperators that are demarcated by democratically accountable law, not by corporate whim. So that's all I want to say. You know, it has been a long time since we lost Aaron, and things have not gotten better by and large. The Van Buren decision is a huge victory and very vindicating, but we have seen a general discrediting of the idea of operating the way Aaron operated, of just unilaterally taking action to fix things that are manifestly broken. And I'm worried that we're going down a path that's going to be hard to reverse course on, and that what we're going to end up with is a kind of duopoly of all-powerful states that are beholden to all-powerful companies, with no room for individual action to fix our lives. And that in that realm, yeah, we might see the extinction of small companies that abuse us, but it will be extinct because they will have been outcompeted by large companies that abuse us in ways that they can only dream of. So this is why I think the work that EFF is doing right now on interoperability and competition is so important, and why it's so exciting that interoperability is on the agenda in so many different forums in Brussels and Washington, in Sacramento, and around the world. And I hope that you will use this talk and the nuance from it to help understand what the difference is between Aaron and a hacker in a hoodie on a Mr. Robot knockoff, what the difference is between AdObserver and Cambridge Analytica, because there is a difference and we can tell the difference. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Corey, for that. And again, so we were just talking about, or I was just talking about with a number of people about Marcus Hutchins, and who actually got a very good decision in his case, sort of miraculously, in the sense that a judge, I don't have the name handy, but the judge actually weighed Marcus's past deeds when he was young, very young teenager, with how he has done very inspirational things as an adult. So he figured it out, you know, as kids often do. And again, a lot of times judges don't give kids a second chance especially people of color, seem to never get second chances. They get thrown in jail often when they are still, before they're even an adult in many states. And so do you have any thoughts about that judge's decision? And, you know, does it give us hope that judges might actually sort of do their homework more about what's going on with these kinds of cases, especially looking towards the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what was going on in that judge's head, but I'll tell you the thing that I think we can take away from it, which is that it kind of kills the old tired trope that lawmakers and elements of the justice system are just too clueless to understand technology, and that's why we have bad technology policy. And as far as I know, there aren't any like microbiologists in Congress, and yet we're not all dead of listeria, right? You can trust your drinking water, right? So all of those technical questions that I raised before about the 737 MAX and masking and vaccines and the roof over your head and whether or not the kitchen safety standards at the restaurant you're going to have dinner in tonight are going to kill you before breakfast, all of those questions get resolved somehow. And when they don't get resolved, I think it's not just ageist to say that they weren't resolved well because Congress is full of old people, although we do have something of a gerontocracy. I think it's also kind of, it lets them off the hook because judges can do their homework, right? They can get briefed by experts.
They have clerks.
They have clerks who understand stuff. Yeah.
Shout out to the clerks.
Yeah, Kevin Smith moment there. Yeah, so, you know, like the reason we have bad policy is not because they're clueless. It's because they don't care, right? Or they don't bother to care. They don't bother to find out. They don't bother to educate themselves, and they can. So, you know, let's just remember, Marcus, the next time we see a judge get it wrong, and realize that getting it wrong is a choice, right? It's not an epiphenomenon of what decade you were born in.
All right. Okay, great. We have a question from you from the YouTube chat.
Very good.
An actual question from the interwebs, as promised. And it is this. It's from GEC3. My country shares all citizen state communications by private companies. We speak about Facebook and others, but Google controls all internet communications with Android, but no one speaks about this. Who is actually going to hold these companies accountable afterwards?
I don't know about afterwards. Like, I don't know if we're ever going to have truth and reconciliation with the Android team. Maybe. It's, but, you know, that's jam tomorrow. I want jam today. You know, it's not enough to like set in motion the forces that might someday hold these companies to account. We also need remedies for people right away. And, you know, I think that Google is not neglected by people who worry about market concentration and privacy. Far from it. You know, if I use Facebook as my major example, it's only because I think that you can kind of draw a little like 2x2 grid of the big firms, and on one axis you can put a company that wants to control everything you do, and on the other axis you can put a company that wants to spy on you all the time. And, you know, over here, they want to control you all the time is Apple, but they don't care what you're doing, right? They're just not even going to look inside the box. So long as you're locked up in their box, they're not going to look inside of it. And over here, you got Google. They don't want to put you in a box, but they're going to spy on you wherever you are, because they don't need a box to spy on you. And then over here, you've got kind of the worst of all worlds, which is which is Facebook rather, which wants to spy on you all the time everywhere, right? Like and lock you up. Right, so Facebook wants to lock you up and spy on you all the time. So I think that's why they get the most attention. That and like their latest publicity stunt, you know, the like willful misreading of science fiction, the you know, cyberpunk dystopia is a suggestion rather than a warning. Pivot to VR has made them kind of the poster child for bad stuff. But I agree. I mean, you know, Google, as I often say, is a company that is kind of a poster child for antitrust enforcement. they've had 1.5 successful internal products, right? They made a really, really good search engine and a pretty good Hotmail clone. Everything else that they made in-house failed. Everything that they did that succeeded, they bought from someone else. Their whole ad tech stack, their video service, you know, the second largest.
Oculus.
Oculus. No, that's Facebook.
I thought, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm talking about Google.
Google.
Yeah, so,
sorry.
you know, we forget that before Google bought YouTube, they had Google Video, which sucked and failed, right? If we had had the kind of antitrust enforcement in the 90s and 2000s that we had in the 60s and 70s, Google wouldn't have been allowed to buy YouTube. YouTube would be a freestanding company. Same with AdMob, same with DoubleClick, right? Google had internal versions of these and they failed. The one product that we can call a big success that Google has had that it designed internally is Google Photos. And Google Photos is a success because it comes free with Android, which is something they bought from someone else, right? So if we had the kind of presumption against integrated vertical monopolies that was once common in America, we wouldn't have this giant firm that is able to wield such outsized influence on everything we do and distort so much of our markets. I mean, don't forget that in the antitrust case against Google that's going through Texas right now, it's a multi-party antitrust case, they just unsealed this giant indictment full of incredibly salacious stuff about how Google and Facebook got together and colluded to rig ad markets. You know, so they were colluding to raise the price of ads and then pass less of it on to newspapers and other publishers. And you know, when newspapers say, "Oh, well, the problem with the internet is that Google steals our content or Facebook steals our content by linking to us," that's obviously untrue, right? The thing that's also obviously true and that I don't understand why they don't put all their energy into is Google steals from Facebook, or Google and Facebook steal from publishers by stealing their money. Right? Not by stealing their content, but by collecting dollars for ads on their website that they don't give them, right? By rigging the market for ads so that their website can command less for the ads, right? That's
what do you mean they're collecting money on their behalf that isn't being given?
So they're like, I pay to advertise on your website, you put the ad on your website, Google brokers the transaction, and they don't give you the money for the ad that I gave them money to show on your website, right? Like that's the heart of this. And Dina Srivasanan wrote a very good law review paper where she really unpicks the kind of ad fraud run by the big duopoly. And you know, like the reason Google has all this dry powder, the reason they have all this money to do all of this sort of policy entrepreneurship is because they're extracting monopoly rents by running fraudulent ad markets. So I'm not talking about this because like I think that saving content is the most important thing. I'd like to save content too, but it's not the most important thing. I'm saying this because if we unrigged our ad markets, if we fixed the monopolization, the illegal collusion, if we enforced antitrust law as it still is written on the books, these companies wouldn't have the money to do the bad things to us that they're doing. Right? They just their choices would not be so salient. They could still make bad choices. You know, I think that we are in danger of saying, well, the problem with Facebook is that Mark Zuckerberg is bad at being the unelected internet czar of 3 billion people's lives. And he is really bad at that job. He sucks at that job. But like that job shouldn't exist, right? The problem isn't that we have the wrong internet czar. The problem is that we have an internet czar, right? And this is where creating more competition by reducing the barriers to entry, by lowering the switching costs, this is where it can make a really big difference. Not because of some like kind of neoliberal fetishization of markets as the solution to all of our problems, but because if you fight for the user, if you fight for the rights of people who use the internet, then first among those rights has to be the right to decide how the internet works for them. And when one company gets to call all the shots, then they lose that fundamental right, and everything else falls out of that.
Okay, so you're saying we should break up Google and
I'm
Facebook.
saying we should break them all up, but I'm saying that it's going to take us, maybe if it takes as long as it took with AT&T, it could take 75 years, which is why we need interoperability now, because that'll let us do something about it while we're waiting. And like, and you know, without getting too deep in the weeds on this breakup stuff, even failed breakups actually do some good, right? So like IBM famously did not get broken up. 12 years in antitrust hell, outspent the DOJ every year that it was in antitrust hell. And yet one of the things that happened as a result of this is they kind of lost their nerve, right? IBM knew that the DOJ really didn't like it when they tied software to hardware, because that was a way to create monopolies, right? And so when IBM made its first PC, they didn't make its operating system. They got a couple of weirdos named Bill Gates and Paul Allen to start a little company called Micro-Soft, which is how it was originally spelled, and sell them a program that they'd bought from someone else called DOS, right? That's where we got Microsoft from, right? It's how we got what became the most successful company in the history of the world, was just terrorizing.
Because they attached their software to their hardware.
No, because they were able to sell the software for a whole bunch of hardware.
No, I mean Microsoft was
no. They attached it to IBM's hardware, but not only that,
right.
IBM knew that one of the things the DOJ really didn't like about them was that they'd gone after what were called plug-compatible add-ons. So these were people who made like printers and keyboards and stuff that plugged into IBM mainframes. So trying to lock up the hardware. So Phoenix Computers was a little startup that reverse engineered the ROM in the IBM PC. And they made a ROM that anyone could buy and make a PC compatible, right? And those PC compatibles are where we got Dell and Compaq and so on. Well, the reason IBM didn't crush Phoenix Computers like a bug, which they absolutely had the power to do, was because they were worried about the DOJ having just gone through 12 years of antitrust hell, right? So like, it cost them their nerve, and it opened the space for all those PC companies, for Microsoft, for all the companies that built on Microsoft's platform. And then, you know, Microsoft got too big for its britches. It became a monopolist. Every pirate wants to be an admiral. You know, give them long enough, they'll turn into the thing that they fought. And then, you know, the DOJ came and they stopped them again. And they convicted Microsoft of being a monopolist, but then Microsoft was able to appeal it.
Right.
But
and what happened? So that was Lawrence Lessig's case at the Supreme Court, and he won sort of, but then they got out of it. What happened there exactly?
Well, they successfully appealed it. So, but the point being that even after they won and they didn't get broken up, when Google launched, they could have done the same thing to Google that they did to Netscape, right? All the same dirty tricks that extinguished Netscape could have been brought to bear on Google. And it's pretty clear that the reason they let Google live was because they just spent 7 years being crushed by the DOJ. And like Bill Gates had been personally humiliated during his deposition and so on. So we got something out of it. So even the weak form of antitrust that we had after the 80s, after the Reagan Revolution, did something. But it got weaker and weaker. And now we have Google. And Google is clearly where Microsoft and IBM and AT&T were, right? They're predatory acquisitions, predatory pricing, out and out fraud in the ad market and so on. And there wasn't until this new administration and Lena Khan and Tim Wu and Cantor, there wasn't any energy to do to them what we did to Microsoft and to do to them what we did to IBM that created Microsoft and so on. We kind of interrupted the cycle. And so that's what's unusual about our world, right? It's like this tech exceptionalist idea that the tech barons are either geniuses or exceptionally evil, I think really just feeds into their own mythology. They're like, as Peter Thiel once said, I'd rather be thought of as evil than incompetent, right? The reality is that they're just like ordinary,
the evil guy.
Yeah, but they're just ordinary mediocrities. They're no better and no worse than you or me. And the one thing that they've got is an open field. They've got nobody telling them no. And so this is exactly, you know, what, if Steve Jobs could have done it, he would have done it during his life. The idea that we can like somehow contrast Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and say Bill Gates was the evil tech billionaire of the 80s and Steve Jobs was the good one. It's ridiculous. If Steve Jobs could have gotten away with it, he would have gotten away with it.
Right.
You know,
if he had lived long enough to get away with it.
Yeah, if he hadn't switched from taking effective cancer therapy to juice cleanses. But you know, the reality is that the thing that constrains firms from becoming monopolists is not their goodwill, it's rules that prohibit the formation and continuation of monopolies. And when we stopped enforcing those rules, we got monopolies, not just in tech, in every sector. You know, we are down to 5 or fewer companies in sectors as varied as professional wrestling, beer brewing, finance, eyeglasses, cheerleader uniforms, athletic shoes, accounting. You know, that's not the result of like, you know, some exceptional thing about technology or Silicon Valley's ability to attract, you know, the titans of the universe. It's the result of like a systemic change that created monopolies. And what we can do with tech is that because we have interoperability, we can weaken the grasp of a monopoly in a way that's harder to do with beer, say, where they have these like stubborn atoms that they have to like move around from, you know, breweries to stores to bars and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, we can do it in a way that no one else can. And so that is the one exceptional thing about technology, is this interoperability that is distinctive and really unique about digital computers, a new thing in the world. And that's why we need to be the vanguard here. That's why we need to fight back. That's why we need that spirit of moving fast and fixing things.
Right, and that is the spirit of Aaron Swartz Day, and what we try to do here too is try to remind people that there are things we can do. And I also want to say, Aaron called it on Google. Aaron literally used to, when he was 14, 15 years old, make jokes about the "Don't be evil" motto that everybody was believing for some reason. He had the Google blog because he was watching Google. He wasn't sure what was going on over there, but it didn't look right. And he was smart he didn't say it didn't look right.
Right.
He was casually putting this blog saying, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this. Is there anybody out there that notices that they're doing this, you know? And then when it was too late, you know, then he got bored with it. And I think he handed it over. He may have even handed it over to them. The point was, it was over. It wasn't interesting anymore. It was just obvious. It had become the plumbing, like a lot of things that Aaron wrote about in the beginning that then, you know, became the plumbing. So, and Tim Wu, you mentioned Tim Wu. Is he actually working for Biden?
Yeah, he's in the White House. He's running the digital
that's
side
great.
of it.
Tim Wu is a law professor that we camped out with in front of Eldred at the Eldred argument. He was there with some grad students. Aaron and I camped out, and Tim Wu was there. And so shout out to Tim Wu. Okay, we've got one more. Do you have time for another couple questions? Because we've got them if you got time. Corey, do you have time?
No, yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry. I thought you were asking if there were other questions.
No, I'm asking you. Okay,
yeah,
good.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So our next question is from Grant Smith Ellis. If you want to turn your camera on, Grant. And he's actually doing our webcast today, and he's going to speak later about the different ways that he is leveling the playing field in the cannabis industry, actually making sure that there is more diversity in the cannabis industry. But he has a question for you right now. Take it away, Grant.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Your introduction is far too kind. And thank you, Corey. That was an amazing talk. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you.
I had a question about private right of action, and then I'm going to leave you with a case recommendation. You talked about the positives of private rights of action, which actually can help trust busting, because you can do things like treble damages and things like that to incentivize consumers to ward off regulatory capture, oligopolies, monopolies. So I guess my question is, what do you think about the inverse, where private right of action is weaponized like we saw with SB 8 in Texas to undermine reproductive health care? And then the case recommendation is Connecticut General Life Insurance v. Johnson from 1939, Justice Hugo Black's dissent. Thank you.
Can you put that one in the chat, please?
I love these kind of questions. All right.
So I think there's something fundamentally different about a private right of action where you don't have to show standing. So again, we're getting into like legal stuff that as a non-lawyer, I'm maybe getting out of my depth, but I will say that the major difference between a private right of action in a privacy statute and SB 8 is that to have a private right of action in a privacy statute, you have to have had your privacy violated, right? This is not about, like, if Alice tells Bob a secret that is Alice's secret to tell Bob, Carol doesn't get to sue because Alice should have kept that secret private, that Bob now knows something private about Alice, because Alice and Bob made that call between themselves, right? The private right of action in SB 8, as I understand it, was that you could be a completely unrelated party, right? Like you could not be the person who wanted an abortion, not be the person who was helping to create the abortion or abetting it in some way. You were just some rando who could then go to court and say, I am entitled to damages because this person is breaking a law and I don't need the Attorney General to enforce it. And so that I think is the main difference. Again, with the caveat that I'm not a lawyer, I'm an activist. I don't know if Kurt's still on the line and wants to weigh in, but yeah, that's my understanding.
Kurt, do you want to weigh in while we've got you?
Sure. I think one of the problems with the private right of action is also the damages. So the Supreme Court had a decision, unfortunate decision, that said you had to have damages, and in a privacy circumstance, there can be statutory damages which establish, if a private violator, you are owed this much, but the court says, well, you have to actually be damaged. So we're still working on the interpretation of the law, but one of the ongoing challenges in privacy lawsuits is to show that you were harmed more than just what the statute said, not just because the statute said so, but you were actually harmed by the privacy violation. And I think privacy violation has many harms associated with it, but the court has to recognize that. And in some cases, sure, you suffered identity theft. There can be actual harms, but for these things to be most effective, it has to recognize that it is a problem for everybody if their privacy is violated. If you go through enforcing them through the government, the FTC or state attorney generals or such, that can be relaxed a little bit.
So I have a question, so if people are allowed to file these lawsuits that aren't really directly related to the law that they are filing a lawsuit again, complicated, to intervene, does that mean that we can all file amicus briefs, whether or not we're directly related? I mean, is it no holds barred now with these crazy cases in Texas? What can we do?
For amicus briefs, anybody can ask for leave to file an amicus brief to assist the court. The court has the discretion about whether to accept that or not, but you do not have to have standing. You do not have to be a party or be affected by the decision or by the law in order to find an amicus brief. Amicus is the Latin friend, amicus curiae is the full name, so a friend of the court. And so what you're doing with an amicus brief, you're just trying to help out the court come to the right interpretation, though the court is more likely to accept your leave to file if you explain why you have a perspective or an understanding that would be valuable for the court.
So wait a minute, you're saying that in these cases, and at least with the Texas abortion law, ban law, that people were allowed to file cases even though they did not have a direct connection, but the amicus people would still have to go under some scrutiny by the judge if we wanted to file a brief in that case? Is that what you're saying, Kurt?
There seem to be, I mean, I don't want to, jump ahead of things, but it does seem like this Texas law turns everything on its head and is quite crazy for this notion that anyone has standing to do this. And we will see how the Supreme Court sees about it. But it's
so wait, can we throw this out on a standing ground?
People are trying to throw it out on a wide variety of grounds. I mean, most fundamentally that, there's the precedent of Roe v. Wade and such, but also that it is doing something innovative procedurally. And if they are correct about that, you could make all sorts of other laws where you could enforce rights that you had nothing to do with. I mean, like, you could imagine the same structure, except it's now a gun law. And if you see anybody with a gun, you could sue them for $10,000, despite the, don't have to worry about the Second Amendment. This is like, right. You don't have to worry about it. And this is the complaint with that law, that it allows anybody to go in there. So we will see. And standing is about the Constitution's requirement that any lawsuit have a controversy, a case or controversy. And this is the notion that to best interpret the law, you should have the people advocating on either side, the adversarial system, the people who are invested in the outcome. They're not just observers coming along. And a law that allows anybody to sue doesn't have that. And in some cases, whatever it is, you can just disagree or agree about whether that's a bad thing that you should make it easier to sue. But in order to get back to like privacy and some of the things that we're trying to address in digital rights, you don't have to go to something like a Texas law in order to get there.
Okay, great. Hey, Corey, I've got a question from Carl Malamud.
Oh, hey, Carl.
Who worked with Aaron, collaborated with Aaron on many things, the Pacer Project, publicresource.org. And he has a question, and his question is, what's your advice, Corey, to individuals who wish to practice adversarial interoperability? How do you learn to do that, and has it become more dangerous?
I think it has become more dangerous as a legal matter. I don't want to chill anyone from trying it, but I think that, Aaron is, quite literally the poster child for the environment that we're working in today. And I think in many ways things got worse afterwards, not better, although, Van Buren, as Kurt said earlier, is a major step forward. Adversarial interoperability, reverse engineering, I think maybe the best place to start would be Bunny Wang's books. He's written 3 of them. The last one was called The Hardware Engineer, but the first one, Hacking the Xbox, is particularly interesting as a kind of meditation on reverse engineering. The whole pen testing reverse engineering world, the security research world, is the place where we see this kind of thing done most aggressively and interestingly. It is by definition adversarial, and they're performing such an important public service. So, like there's a zine called POC or GTFO, Proof of Concept or Get the Fuck Out, that published a great anthology with Peachpet a couple of years ago that is just papers describing reverse engineering and POCs. And so, that's as a print resource, I'd start there. Beyond that, the world of reverse engineering is so well coterminal with the security research world that following security research forums, InfoSec forums, is a great place to go.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for that. It was really, really helpful. I will take my last check to make sure we don't have another pressing question from the interwebs. No, we're good. Okay, so now Corey, if you would please introduce Will.
So our next speaker is Will Howes. He's an Aaron Swartz Day volunteer who works on the Bad Apple Project and hopped on a plane to go to Aaron Swartz Day in his junior year of high school. The rest, as they say, is history. Will's talk is called General Guidelines for Effective High School Activism, and it's based on Aaron's blog post, How to Save the World, Part 1. Take it away, Will.
Okay, thank you so much, Corey. I'm going to share my slides here. Okay. All right, so that's right. Today I'm going to be talking about lessons in high school activism, and we're going to be doing it through we're, I guess, inspired by this piece Aaron wrote about a decade ago called How to Save the World, Part 1. It was this very interesting piece that essentially had Aaron introduce, I guess what you could call 8 disciplines. And with those disciplines, he imagined a team consisting of experts in each of those disciplines that then worked together in dynamic ways to resolve, political goals. And specifically, Aaron was talking about how the internet allowed this team of these experts in these disciplines to engage in a way that wasn't previously possible without that sort of revolutionary, he hesitantly called it revolutionary connectivity. So we're going to look at those 8 principles here. They include investigations, policy development, PR in media or press, activism, lobbying, elections, and lawsuits. And I highly encourage you to read this piece for yourself. You can search, How to Save the World, Part 1, Aaron Swartz, you'll find it. But one of the really important, I think, ways he sort of explores this in the piece is he takes the viewpoint of a person in one of these fields, and he explores the ways that that person would engage with the 7 other disciplines. And I think that that's a very important way of thinking about it because, if you were to be a part of this sort of dream team, as he calls it, one of these experts, it's important to, rationalize how is it that you're interacting with these people in this modern internet way. So here, we're going to be taking these 8 disciplines that Aaron set out, and I'm going to do my best to apply them to a high school context. I have 3 stories and then hopefully 3 lessons from my high school career that I'm going to try to paint, what went well and the important takeaways from these things. Generally speaking here, the first story is about acting with preparation. The second is about acting with intent. And the third is about acting with others. Those get sort of split, where the first 2 are about, I think, advocacy of sort of national or like larger scale issues. And the third is more about affecting change on a smaller scale, more local level. But starting with these first 2, part 1, we're going to be advocating for the big issues. So where does that take us? We're going to be looking back to 2017. If you were tuned in there, I'm sure you know this guy here, Ajit Pai, the then FCC chairman, fighting to repeal the recently won net neutrality legislation just 2 years before he was in office. There was a big fight and we won, and we had these great net neutrality rules put in place. And then obviously there was a sort of battle where Ajit Pai was trying to repeal them. He was the chairman there. So just a quick run through of what net neutrality is. Essentially, it's about equal access to information. On the left, you can imagine information flowing equally, and on the right, without net neutrality, there's this fear that some information is prioritized in one way or another. Again, this is a very broad overview. There's a lot of nuance there, but that's the general idea. I'm from South Dakota, and the application of net neutrality here isn't just about one service being prioritized over another, but it's also about unequal access to information or internet, in general. So rural broadband access is a big thing that net neutrality addresses, but without, good net neutrality rules, that is threatened. And for that reason, I think it was particularly relevant where I was coming from. So, I'll stay here for a sec. My sort of introduction to this, I've been following net neutrality for a while, but I think it was Fight for the Future and Demand Progress were teaming up to host a national day of protest. And they had this great website called battleforthenet.com, and you could see a map of all the protests that were happening on the day it was happening. And you could see a lot on the East Coast and a lot on the West Coast, but there was very sparse protests happening in the middle of the country, right where I was, and I could see that nowhere in my town was a protest. And I thought, well, why not me? Why not? And I was, I guess at this time I was 16 years old. I was a junior in high school, and so I did this, and I signed it up, and I talked to my parents, and they were like, okay, we'll support you. And I was ready to go. So the first thing I did was I made a bunch of posters. I made the poster, and then I printed out a bunch of copies. And I got in touch with high schoolers at other high schools, people that I knew that were sympathetic to this cause, that would be able to sort of spread the word. And I'll say this right now, is the goal of this sort of what I was doing here wasn't, I didn't think, oh, if I do this protest, it's going to change. This is going to be put us over the edge, and we're going to keep net neutrality in place. But it was more about advocacy of the existence of the issue. That was the whole sort of goal here. And so in service of that goal, getting information both out about the protest, but also what it was that net neutrality was happening. These things are happening in parallel the whole time. So I got these students handing out, putting up posters in their own high schools. I put up posters in mine. I also made heavy use of social media, both advocating for the protest and for explaining net neutrality using Snapchat, Instagram, and I guess Reddit, if you want to count that as a social media. I think if you were doing this today, you'd probably use TikTok because that's where everybody is. And then finally, if ever there's a club, that is even tangentially related to something you're advocating for, it was called the Young Progressives Club. I talked to them and I gave a little talk about net neutrality, and there was a pretty good turnout there. And so a lot of people that day learned what it was, and they also learned about this protest that was happening. So that was sort of some of the aspects of PR that were happening here. I guess I'll just make a point here quick, is that right, with this whole framework that Aaron has, it's, you're trying to act as one of these 8 disciplines, and then you're trying to engage with people in the other disciplines in an effective and internet savvy way. And so in this way, I'm trying to be the activist operating with other PR people. And so here I've got the people, doing PR for me in a competent way at the other high schools. And I'm rallying the troops in that way. So there's also this.
Will, I just want to let you know that we've got plenty of time because you've got time and it's just the break after you.
Sure.
So I just didn't want you to feel rushed because it's so interesting what you're talking about. All right,
okay, great. So here we are. There's this discipline of press, and this is going to be a running theme throughout, is the importance of press. But looking at specifically your high school press, your local paper, your paper at your high school, assuming you have one, hopefully you do. I think that's an indispensable resource, no matter what it is you're doing, whether you approach them or they approach you. Getting a story written about what it is you're doing is very important. And a lot of these papers, right, aren't just print. Your high school paper, oftentimes you have this online component as well, which is indispensable because not only do the students get to read about it, but anyone can read about it. So that was another element that was something I did leading up to the event. I did also reach out to local papers in the community, notably the Argus Leader is our sort of big local paper, and they did end up writing a piece after the protest, but we'll get there in just a second. On the day of the protest, it was very busy because it suddenly dawned on us that we needed a permit. That's something that you need in many places, but you have to be 18 years old to get a permit, and I was only 16, so I had to ask my mom to go down to the police department and get a permit for the protest that was happening in 6 hours. While she was handling that, God bless her, my grandma.
Shout out to mom. Woo!
Yeah, exactly,
Right,
exactly. My grandma was at our dining room table making the posters. I think you can see this poster right now, making a number of posters for people to have in case they showed up and didn't have any. So yeah, shout out to my grandmother as well. But anyway, when the event happened, people showed up and it was like 20 degrees, and that's not even talking about wind chill. It was freezing cold. But I think we had 50 people come through all in all. That's not really, numbers aren't so important here. The fact that we had a lot of young people and surprisingly a lot of people from the community as well. Primarily we were advertising to younger people. But I think this Reddit post that I did got a little bit of traction, as well as just the Battle for the Nets platform, putting it on the map made anyone be able to see that. And so in terms of, that wouldn't have been possible without the internet, right? This map showing that this protest was happening. It was just crazy. So the event happened. You can see, I love this picture. You can see we're right out front of Verizon. Sometimes the employees would like peek through the window, like trying to figure out what the deal was. The press showed up, they filmed us, and I think I gave a little blurb or something. But all in all, it was, young people and people in the community came out in impressive numbers, I would say, to advocate for something that some of them didn't even know about until this event had been put onto their radar. And so in that way, it was a big success, I would say, this event. But some of the takeaways here to keep in mind are, it's very important to be prepared. Had we not realized that we needed a permit, or had my mom not been free to emergency style get this permit, there could have been disaster. They could have lawfully shut us down. Now, I don't think that is like a good reason to shut it down, right? It's kind of dumb, but it's something that could have been a real thorn in our side had we not been conscious of it. Another very important takeaway here is spreading the word, is making use of proper PR and media channels to maximize engagement. And yeah, I'm gonna just shout out, use the press, and I mean not just your local press, but use your high school paper. because more often than not, you know, there's these journalists that get sick and tired of writing about like who's the prom king and queen and like doing like a top 10 funny Halloween costume list, and they're itching to write about something impactful, meaningful. And if you can find that journalist in your program, they're going to be all over your story, and they're going to take on a lot of the work that you would otherwise have to do. And so, yeah, I can't recommend it enough. So again, yeah, I mean, these are the relevant principles that sort of tie back to what Aaron was talking about there. So moving on here to the next event after this net neutrality thing was in early 2018. There was the tragic Parkland shooting, and in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of discourse about gun violence and gun control, and specifically there was a number of entities planning some sort of national school walkout, you know, in protest of a lack of action against gun violence. And so I had a couple buddies, and we all thought that that we should participate in that in some capacity. But our situation is a little bit complicated, just because of where it was that we were, right? If I can remind you, I'm from South Dakota, and that's right. It'd be one thing if you can imagine being in Berkeley, California. I think, you know, some high schoolers might plan this event and everyone's excited to like get out of class and support this conversation and this discussion, but it's a little bit of a different culture in South Dakota regarding, you know, nobody's pro gun violence, but the solutions are, that discussion is a lot harder to have. And so we made early on a strategic choice to involve the administration when planning the event in order to maximize attendance, because we were pretty sure that if it was the case that in order to participate in what it was we were planning to walk out, that if students were going to risk getting in trouble, that they wouldn't bother. And so, right, we made this sort of concession that we would work within the boundaries that the administration set for us in order to maximize attendance. And so leading up to that, and I guess in some sense that was us lobbying the administration. We were using the school press to promote the event. Notably, there were articles written before, during, and after. We had some really strong support from the paper on this event. There were a surprising number of people that actually showed up to the event, over 1,000 kids, I think easily, which was over half the school's population. And again, like, no way that would have happened. I know kids that told me, like, I'm not going to show up if I'm going to get in trouble, and yet I saw their faces here today. So there's some impact, there's some validity there in terms of making these compromises. But it's important. I guess I'll just briefly say we had during the event, we memorialized sort of the victims, and we had some commentary about gun violence, and then I talked about sort of trying to keep an open mind about these things, because the principal, he said you can't be political about this. And so obviously the fact that we were able to get like 1,000 kids into an auditorium in the middle of the school day in South Dakota, you know, for an event about gun violence is itself, that's a political, you know, there's a politics there, but we weren't allowed to, I think he was saying, like, you can't say like gun control or anything as the specific solution. So we sort of had to dance around that, which I'll get to in a sec, how I feel about that. But like I said, we had this post-event press. I think that keeping the press going is critical here where possible. Just because, I mean, this was a great article written by my friend Tim, summarizing the sort of response to the event and the discussion that happened because of the event, which is just critical. So some of the takeaways here are, this was a harder event in general than the net neutrality one, because your act, I say your act with intent. It was unclear, you know, exactly what the goal was of what we were doing, or at least the goal got a little muddied when we had to make these compromises with the administration. Because when you look at that net neutrality event, the goal was clearly advocacy and education. And here, it was, sort of muddied between memorial and solidarity, but also, trying to promote discussion using, a limited vocabulary. So that was just sort of difficult. So having a very clear goal in mind is important. And following that up is having a call to action. I say the biggest sort of downfall of our event, or the biggest shortcoming, was that we did not conclude with a call to action. And I think you could have had a meaningful call to action that wasn't exactly political per se, but definitely, political. I think you could have worded it carefully such that you were being clever about it, but we just didn't. And I think that was sort of a result of not having clear intentions about what it was we were trying to accomplish with the event in general. So having those two things paired together, I think is, of the utmost importance. Again, I'm calling out, use the press, use your student paper. They're itching to write these stories. They're itching to do something meaningful. And so, the principal's doing PR, lobbying the administration in some capacity. Lobbying is about compromise, but be careful about what it is you're compromising. So here we are moving on to the sort of second part, if you will, but it's the last event I'll be talking about. And I've titled it here, Saving the World in Front of You. And what I mean by that is affecting change at a local level, not just sort of promoting knowledge about these these larger institutional problems or what have you, but trying to affect change right in front of you. So here we've got the athletics dress code rebellion. And what that means is, I'll give you some context. I ran cross country for all 4 years of high school. And for the first 3 years, we were allowed to run without a shirt on. And obviously high school sports and sports in general are very gendered in their organization there. But essentially here, if you had breasts, you had to wear a sports bra, but that was all, right? If it's a hot day, it's muggy, no one's going to make you wear a big cotton shirt or whatever. And for people without breasts, you just run shirtless and that's fine. And that was cool for the first 3 years. For that fourth year, my senior year of high school, they suddenly changed the policy, or I think more accurately, began to enforce a policy that had always been on the books, where you then did have to wear a shirt, even if it's miserable outside. You must be wearing something more than a bra or just nothing. So what I did is, at this time, you might have noticed my adoration for high school press. I myself was on the paper, and I thought, well, gee, I'm going to investigate. I'm going to figure out the source of this policy, and I'm going to write a paper about it, or an article about it. And so that's what I did. I spent a month doing interviews from everyone from fellow student athletes to other coaches of other sports, to the principal, to the school's athletic director, and then the entire district's athletic director. And I would just ask them, I thought, what are your thoughts on this policy and why is it in place? And what is very interesting about this scenario that I think is probably widely applicable, and especially just dress code policies in general, is that when you press people whose jobs it is are to defend these policies, they start sweating and they start answering in ways that don't make a lot of sense. And you might ask the same person this question once every week, and their answer is going to be different every time. And so by the time I was done with this month of data collection, I was amazed at the nonsensical answers I had received. And it was just laughable. One of my favorites is I interviewed my school's athletic director, and we were talking about it, and he just brings up his service in Iraq, and he's like, yeah, man, if I was walking around in the desert in 125-degree heat with my Kevlar vest on and I survived, so get over it, is kind of what he was saying. And I was just like, dude, we're not talking about that. But it's they don't have answers. They're just pulling from whatever they can. And so if you find yourself in the role of an investigator doing investigations, I think just being consistent with your question asking and really putting I guess these people's hands to the fire to see what you can get out of them is just critical. So I published that piece, and at the end, I included a call to action for people to attend a school board meeting, a public school board meeting that was happening a couple of days from then. And so I publicized that meeting on my Instagram account. I've sort of, and I'll kind of explain this in this story here. I'm playing the role of many different disciplines here. And so in this instance, before I was the investigator, now I'm sort of doing PR here. And I posted to my Instagram account this picture here, this very goofy image of me, just no shirt on, nips out and all. And I encourage people to, read this article I wrote and show up to the meeting, to clarify what it is, we believe in as a community. And so, and then here I am now, wearing the hat of a lobbyist, addressing the school board, creating an engagement with them, trying to move them onto my position. And you'll notice in the background, you can see some young people sitting there. I had invited a lot of people, and I think maybe it's about all that showed up, like 4 or 5 cross-country runners. One of my fellow newspaper staff men showed up, but otherwise it wasn't a great turnout. So that did end up garnering some press. There was a person that attended the event who just always goes. They were like, that was their beat. And they saw me give this address, and then they wrote this article here, which was, I would not say very well written, if only because I was having something written about me rather than approaching the press and having, some control over the narrative. And I'll have a little bit more about to say about that in a second. But interestingly enough, this article was then syndicated onto Fox News. And I just wanted to share with you some of the lovely comments found in this comment section. People are like, basically like, get over it, buddy. I love this one. It says, hey boy, get used to being told what to do. It's gonna happen the rest of your life, so stop whining. And I just would love to meet this Granny Sims. And then, it's just like the wild misogyny throughout this comment section is insane. But I guess that's, what you're gonna find on that website. So the conclusion to this was sort of unsatisfying. I addressed the board, I wore all these hats, I did all these things, and I ultimately ended up getting an audience with the superintendent of the district, and he said like, oh, I love when young people take charge and have a belief. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, what can we do about that? And he's like, well, I'll get back to you. And then he emailed me back like a month later, and he's like, we're not gonna do anything. And I was like, all right. So it ended up that nothing actually changed there. No policy difference was instituted, and that was heartbreaking for sure. So when I reflect back on this, I sort of pointed out that I was wearing many hats. And I think that sort of goes chiefly against what it was that Aaron is talking about in this How to Save the World Part 1 essay that he wrote, where ideally, you're going to have a group of people who all specialize in these different, disciplines, but they're all going to be working together. And as competent as one person might be, as competent as Aaron ever was, he was never doing anything alone. He was working with all sorts of other people. And so, I had reached out to some local business owners who sold sportswear and sports apparel. And I said, hey, I'm working on this thing here. Would you lend any support? But I emailed them 2 days before the event. I didn't give them enough time. So if I were to do that again or something like it, I think it's very important to build a coalition of people who have a similar interest here. And that includes athletes, not just in cross country, but in football and volleyball and in all of the sports, and build that coalition beyond just your school, right? And, you have the means to establish a legitimate political force here, if only flaw of my approach to this issue. Failure stinks and it hurts, but I do have something to say on that in just a little bit here. Again, I'm gonna shout out the student press here because there was some lovely coverage of that. I guess in some sense I'm patting myself on the back, but I don't mean to. I mean that that was instrumental in terms of creating awareness of the problem outside of even just the school board and the students at the school. There were comments on that article from parents who didn't really know about this but had some thoughts to share on the matter. And so this, I've listed out all of the relevant principles here, and in some sense I was playing the role of all of